Episode number 64, Chatting with Nuts, and I am joined tonight by a very special guest. In fact, I think this is one of the more fascinating guests that I've actually somehow convinced to come onto the show, which is fantastic. And that is Jared Henderson. How are you doing today, my friend? I cannot hear you currently.
Oh no, my mic. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Sorry, I think my mic got unplugged at that moment. Okay,
Beautiful
we got that
start.
out of the way. I'm doing great, Jimmy. I'm doing better than my mic is.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that we got the first technical difficulty out of the way now. That always happens. I always think back whenever I did my first big author interview, which was with Steven Erickson, and the whole first 2 minutes is me doing technical support, and I was so flustered. But that's the beautiful thing about doing lives is that, you know, the folks get to see all of it. It's just uncut.
Yeah. And we're not like those big live streamers that have, 6 mods in the chat and a couple of people running sound for us or something. This is the raw stuff, guys. This is like the real authentic.
A one-man operation, folks. And sometimes I wonder if I should get mods, but dude, honestly, I've only banned like 10 people in these live chats and I've done 64 of them. I think that's a pretty good ratio.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that's pretty good. Do you ban more people in your comments?
Definitely more than 10. However, I have been very fortunate with comments. I don't get a lot. And I think that also is kind of tied into the fact that no one watches my videos. I think it aids me in evading mean people. Yeah. With someone with the amount of attention that you're receiving, I would assume that you probably have to be careful with your mental health reading some of those.
Yeah, I just ban early and often, man. Like, I pretty much, when I first started and I first kind of blew up, and I mean, we could talk about this, but I blew up pretty fast on YouTube. Like my first YouTube video went big kind of for me and kind of on accident. And I just had to, at first I was really conscientious. I was like, oh, I'll give them I'll write down their name somewhere and I'll give them like a 3-strike policy or something. That lasted about a month. And now it's just like, man, if especially with your first comment and you say something that I think is like over the line, you're just gone. And it's helped so much because YouTube shows you those comments as soon as you log on to the studio app, right? And I just wanted to say, nope, okay, I'm not looking at them. Yeah, I'm not looking. I don't delete, if someone has a good criticism, like, hey, Jared, you really messed up on this, this part or something like that, totally fine, right? But as soon as it veers into weird personal attacks, as soon as it just is totally off topic and they've decided to just rant, just get rid of them. Get rid of them.
They're in totally different sides of the equation. I mean, I had a comment from this person. They had never commented on one of my videos, and they panned Perdido Street Station to me. And I love the book. And I read it and I was like, maybe I didn't love the book. Like, wow, what a great comment. Like, I couldn't believe, and they disagree with everything I said in the video, but they did in such a way that was very, it was convincing almost. I love that. I think I might have pinned it. Maybe I didn't pin it, but it's one of the best comments I've ever received. And it happens to be one where the person thought I was dead wrong. But then, when someone comes in and says, hey, you have like a neo-Nazi haircut, I'm like, well, now you're gone. Like,
yeah. I've gotten that before. Not neo-Nazi haircut, but random people speculating about my politics or something like this in always ways that I would say no one's ever quite nailed it. Like no one ever has. And it'll be like the same video and I'll get like different accusations of stuff like this and be like, yeah, generally my comments section's a pretty positive place. And if I get rid of these people super fast, it stays positive and it stays constructive. And I found it's just actually better for everyone else too. Or at least that's what I tell myself if I feel a little guilty.
I think I have to tell myself that so that I don't ever quit, because sometimes it can be extremely overbearing. The YouTube hide user is one of the best things they've ever done. You literally, when you hide someone on YouTube, they can continue to comment, but no one can see their comment, only them.
Yeah.
Which is a beautiful thing, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's good. And then they can just shout into the void, because I have this sort of theory about this. Sorry to immediately go off the rails here, but
go for it.
Part of this is that, so YouTube is it's a social media platform, but it's unlike every other social media platform out there mostly, which is that it's highly asymmetric, right? So you and I are on a big screen right now. and then all of the chat people are like much smaller, and they're all clustered together. And so there's like a clear division between like you and me and like them in this video, right? If we went to a different video, we'd be on the other side. And for a certain type of person, I think what that means is they're just like, I can just shout into the void and maybe someone will hear me, and I'll just do it, right? And like I'll just shout my theories about something in this comment section because maybe someone will eventually find it. And they don't even think about you that much. Or if they do think about you, they don't think of you on like on equal terms. Right. When I read it, I'm like, wow, a person just said that to me. But that's never how they conceptualize it. And I think yeah, I think that's part of it. But
I've never really thought about it like that. But I've also always thought of the comment that they're personally addressing me, which may not be what we are in their mindset. Alan says he's huge even in the chat because he has it full screen maximized. So I'm glad that
good for you, Alan. I just want to point out that an earlier comment did say 2 HD cameras, Alan could never. So
shots fired. Oh
yeah,
my!
Yeah, someone else said it. Someone else said it. I'm just
Connor.
I'm just repeating it. I'm coming for. I don't know if I can beat Bridger on views because he's got that voice and people could just listen to you guys talk while you go to sleep. I think I could maybe knock out Alan if we go hard enough.
Well, I actually have a big announcement. The YouTube algorithm has blessed Alan's episode, and it is approaching 50,000, and he has surpassed Bridger, and he is now the #1 viewed episode. And
congratulations, Alan. Yeah.
So the task just got even taller. And there's a second episode with him that got 20,000 views this week. And I don't know what's happening, but it's being recommended on Mr. Beast videos. And I don't know why.
I was genuinely shocked, man. I looked at some of these, I watched a few of these just to kind of get a feel to see what kind of gotcha questions you were going to do. And, and I watched a few and I was like, how is he getting 50,000 views on these things? Because like as Alan just points out, I have 175,000 subs roughly. And when I do a live stream and do a VOD, it gets like 7,000 views. Like I can't get my own subscribers to watch my live streams.
I don't know what's happening. I don't understand what this is. And it never was intended to really be a successful thing, but it's something that I really love doing. I've been looking forward to this all week. And it seems that people enjoy coming here to do that. In fact, even more so than my normal videos. And instead of trying to figure it out, I've just leaned into it at this point. And I guess Mr. Beast videos recommend me now, and Theo Vaughn. So
okay, interesting. I was going to say with Mr. Beast, it might be just the Jimmy Alliance.
You think?
That's his name's Jimmy too, right? So and with Theo Vaughn, it's a little harder to say.
Yeah, his podcast episodes. I think YouTube is seeing my channel as a podcast now and is throwing me into that pool, which fine. That's great.
I honestly think you'd make a really solid like weekly, daily podcast, these kind of live streams. I think you could do it very well, and I think just get interesting guests and things. Just keep grinding. I think you'd knock it out of the park.
I appreciate it, man. I'll tell you what, I have considered doing weekly, maybe not a guest every week because that gets hard to book that guest out and everything. And the biggest issue I have is I'm so afraid that I will continuously repeat myself to where people are just tired of hearing me talk. Like I'm so worried about like wearing out my welcome with people and then being old news. It's like my biggest fear.
Yeah, I actually think though that probably the kind of content for this is like kind of just like people feel comfortable, right? They feel like cozy here or something. And so they'll just like put it on. So I think novelty is not the biggest thing.
I would agree with you because I've actually had comments before, and a lot of them are on the Alan episodes, and they say, I don't read books. I don't know how this came up, but I love listening to you two. And I'm like, wow, that's real. You should read a book, but that's really cool. Like I like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you might just have, you have the right vibe, right? And so that might just be the way to go. Who knows? I mean, you don't need to take my YouTube advice. So
I probably should, considering the fact, like you said, man, when I followed your channel, and I think I came across you with one of your top 10. I think it was maybe your top 10 sci-fi, which was like 24 to 30 minutes. It was a longer video. I really enjoyed it. And I remember then I think you had 80,000 subs. And then I looked the next day, you had like 120, and now you're at 175. And I'm like, this is just exploding. And I think it's because you have such a great aesthetic. Even right now, like
Oh, thank
it
you.
is just, I want to pull up a blanket, drink a bourbon, like the little light in the background.
Yeah.
You have a very nice style, and I'm assuming that that's intentional. Am I right?
Yeah, partly. I mean, I think that probably my greatest strength as a YouTuber or even like as a writer or any of these things is that I get annoyed pretty easily at stuff that I consume, like media that I consume, and I sort of have lots of weird things that I dislike. And so, when I started making YouTube videos, I just started thinking about like what could I do that would be, I don't know, a little bit different or wouldn't annoy me if I looked back back at it. And so, I have like oddly weird views about like colors of lights and stuff. Like I really dislike the fact that so many people have really sharp cameras. I have a little diffusion filter on on my camera to make my very expensive camera look more like less sharp, right? To like literally reduce the quality
That's the most
slightly.
hipster thing I've ever heard.
But it's totally worth it. This is and just doing things like that. I figured so many people are really fast paced and like they talk really loudly. And I was like, what if I just didn't do that? What if I practically
Mm,
am like halfway. It's less extreme than it was when I started. But when I started, it was like pretty low, like kind of all the time. And people would tell me they're like, they would put me in like ASMR playlists. And
fascinating.
and I kind of elevated my speech a little bit because I didn't want that so much. But I mean, that's how extreme I tried it for a little while.
Wow. I think that's a very interesting approach. And it reminds me, so whenever I did pro wrestling, you had to learn to cut the 60-second promo. And I'll give you every single independent wrestler's at promo. Thursday night, they're just yelling, pointing at the camera.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the way to
totally.
grab attention is to do the Jake the Snake route, which for those who aren't savvy to pro wrestling history, which is fine. It's whenever you talk silently enough, just silently enough where they have to lean in.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
is this?
yeah,
What is,
yeah.
and the way you're delivering it with confidence makes them say, "Well, I got to hear what this guy's saying because that look in his eyes is driving
Yeah,
me
yeah.
mad." And that's kind of the feeling I get whenever you talk about this. I mean, the fact that you have an idea of the aesthetic that you like, it shows. And I also like that even in writing, like when someone knows how to go for a certain feel or tone, it
Mhm,
always stands out to me. People like Joe Abercrombie, for instance, is very consistent in his style and his tone throughout his books.
mhm.
And it definitely plays into the visual medium as well. And I think leaning into that's probably one of the reasons why you've been successful.
I think so. I mean, actually, like where I film changes a lot because, like, I have a kid, like, I have a very young son, and we live in a very small apartment currently because we're thinking about moving. And so I don't have like a desk. I don't have like a book. I don't have like normal bookshelves anymore. I have these things that I hung up myself. And so I move the camera around a lot and stuff. But the point is, like, can you get the lighting right? Can you get the angles roughly correct? Can you do these things? And most of the time, it kind of works out. And I think people just like the feeling of it, the details end up kind of building an aesthetic for someone or kind of building an atmosphere. And then from that atmosphere, right, we can just kind of invite you into a certain kind of discussion, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
almost like you're meeting
yeah,
them halfway. You're almost welcoming them into your space and then
yeah,
sitting down
yeah, yeah.
to tell them why they should read Ursula K. Le Guin or Octavia
Yeah,
Butler or whatever it might be. Right.
that's certainly it, right? Also, yeah, if you are very inviting to get people in, you can be significantly more like didactic with them. So I often put like in my titles like something, 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 like this many books of this kind you should read, right? I'm not saying like these are great. I'm not saying I love these books. I'm saying you should read them, and you
Strong
have to.
recommendation.
I'm telling you what to do. And if you say I don't want to, I'm just like, well, you've done something wrong, wrong. And so you have to be certain sort of friendly to pull that off.
That is a really interesting dynamic that I had not really thought about because, talking with you and then obviously watching a lot of your videos, I've never taken you as being super direct or start. You need to do this.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
I'm- that's an interesting balance. It's almost
yeah.
in conflict with itself.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you do it too forcefully, then people will naturally resist it, right? Because people hate being told what to do in like a really direct way or in a
Yes.
really brash way. But if you just like kind of say, you should do this, and then maybe 2 videos later you mention the same book and be like, yeah, you really should read this. Like, I have so many people say to me, I finally read Crime and Punishment and Aristotle and like Ursula K. Le Guin's the Dispossessed because of you. And I'm like, I wonder which video was the tipping point, because I've mentioned those books in so many videos.
You do mention the Dispossessed in many a video, and I
Yeah,
feel like I should have read that instead of Left Hand of Darkness this week, because I was on a business trip and I was like, I can finish a book on this trip. What should I do? And I knew you were coming on, and I know how much you love Ursula K. Le Guin. So, and I've read most of her C, and I was like, I want to try some of the sci-fi. So I read Left Hand of Darkness, and I really enjoyed it. But thinking about it, I probably should have read the Dispossessed if I really wanted to pay homage to you.
Yeah, I mean, the Dispossessed is like, man, it's one of those books that I so vividly remember reading it the first time, and I so vividly remember just being, just how my life changed when I read that book, and I remember finishing it and immediately texting my girlfriend, who later became my wife, and being like, "You have to read The Dispossessed." I don't think she's read it yet, but but
and you still married her. How kind of you.
So yeah, we're working on it. So, but I remember it was just that book that clicked immediately, and I was like, life is different now. This is like, I can mark my life slightly differently, pre The Dispossessed and after. And I know it's not her most famous work. I know some people say it's overwritten. Some people don't like the politics of it, all this stuff. But man, it's just science fiction perfection in my mind. It's just not even just science fiction perfection. It's just perfection. Yeah, it's a terrific book.
Yeah, I mean, your love for Le Guin is pretty evident. I loved your video that you did on her. It's one of my favorite booktube videos. It's informative. It was entertaining, and it's weird. We live in an era where you can go on YouTube and get motivated to read a book, and that is a wild thing that people 20 years ago probably could never ever related to.
Yeah, right. I mean, everyone wants to talk about how like the internet's ruining reading, and on the broader culture that might be partly true, but like there is this weird thing where how many people who liked to read some obscure genre or like to read one particular author could go and meet a bunch of people that also like to read those things, right? Probably not much, right? If you liked Tolkien at the right time in American history, it was like you and one other dude at your high school.
Yeah, like when it came out, right? When it came out, it wasn't very popular.
Yeah, so and it's just like you two sitting in a basement talking about how much you freaking love elves. And now we can have huge, massive live streams where tons of people come in to talk about how much they love elves and talk about which author's version of elves they like them. I mean, like that's just so wild. It's surreal. It's really surreal. I'm glad you liked the Le Guin video. I really was proud of that video. It is not it underperformed my videos by like a long shot. It like people did not click on it compared to my other videos. And I hate saying that to other people because people don't like when you talk numbers and stuff, but it really underperformed, and I didn't think it would. I thought people would really be into it. And I don't know quite why, but I have to say I felt really good about the video. And so I can kind of say, no matter what, I would have wanted to put that video out.
Well, it's one that will probably grow in time, and as people
I hope so
come back, and it really, science fiction and fantasy have only really gotten more popular and more accepted, especially from the Western standpoint in America. Europe's always been a little bit more welcoming to science fiction. I think that it has opportunity to grow greatly, and it's very well done. The one thing that I'm so impressed with you about, because I've been working on a similar video for George R. Martin. It's taking forever.
That'll do so much better, because the George R. R. Martin fan base is they're much more online, man. Yeah, but
but unfortunately the comments will just be like, when's is never going to happen, and I'm like, I'm talking about Sand Kings here, people. I'm talking about the sci-fi stuff. But I think that the most impressive part of that video is the fact that you kept it under like 20 minutes, because I have such a problem. Obviously I host this show that sometimes goes 4 hours. I suck at being brief, and I think that it's a skill, and it's one I wish I was better at.
Yeah, I'm actually going to look. I think I kept it under
12 minutes.
Well, under 12 minutes. It's 11
minutes. So impressive.
Yeah. It's dense. Like I tried to pack as much as I could in there. When I first recorded it, I probably had 45 minutes of raw footage.
Wow.
And I had scripted a lot. I actually had a lot of stuff that I scripted that I cut out of that. And because I wanted it to be concise, I wanted it so that people could just really get into it. And I had this like 10-minute, no, 10, probably a 5-minute plan segment about like the anarchist ethics of writing and about like coercion and about how do you convince your audience and all this stuff. And I was like, I find this really cool, but I don't like know if anyone else will. So
I actually was going to ask you about that tonight.
Yeah.
I'm not even kidding you. I was
Okay,
actually
yeah,
going to
well,
ask about that.
Well, I'm happy to talk about that completely, but I cut that out of the video just because I wasn't sure, you know, where because I wanted to make it a video that people would watch from start to finish. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and you're right. It's dense, but in the right way, you know, 12 minutes of my time, 11 minutes of my time. And I learned a whole bunch as someone who has already kind of read a bunch about Ursula K. Le Guin, just because I was fascinated by her journey through Earthsea. You know, I learned stuff, and that's cool. And it was very entertaining and very engaging. And I was just like, man, I wish I could make this type of video. Like, I wish I had that skill.
And there's, I mean, well, it's a thing you develop, right? It's a thing you practice.
Right.
Probably the one I did before that was like that style that did much better, which was more surprising for me, is that I did a video about One Piece.
Ah, yes, the philosophy of One Piece, right?
Yeah, I did a philosophy of One Piece video, and that was like where I kind of practiced the storytelling and stuff. Yeah. Oh man, when I was doing that Le Guin video though, man, I learned so much about her that cut out. Did you know that Samuel Delany, who's a great science fiction writer that not enough people I think on BookTube talk about, only a few people I know of. I think I saw Joanna in the chat. I know she reads.
Yeah,
Delany.
she just read, loved it. Yeah,
she just read Babel 17, which is good. They had the same editor at Ace Books. The Don Walheim, who was the first book editor to give Le Guin a deal, was also Sam Delaney's, and that was when Ace Books used to publish paperbacks where there would be 2 books in the paperback.
wow.
You'd flip it, and then Sam Delaney said he read the first Le Guin novel, Rocannon's World, and said that he didn't like it.
Oh no, he banned it.
He says this in a documentary about Le Guin. He's like, I read it, it wasn't that good. Or he says like, I was not impressed or something. Delaney's still alive, but he's like this big old dude, got this giant beard, and he's kind of chuckling about how he didn't like it. And it's so clearly not Le Guin's best. It's like so far away from the greatness she would achieve. But it's just funny to hear someone say it.
Oh, sometimes the most interesting thing about a book is hearing other authors' takes on it. I mean, the fact that Tolkien was not a fan of Dune, when I heard that, I was like, tell me more. I would love to hear how Tolkien felt about Dune. He was not impressed at all.
Tolkien also didn't like most of what C.S. Lewis wrote, even though they were friends.
Yeah, which is really fascinating because at one point they were kind of at odds on religion, and then they somehow, I think they kind of meshed eventually. But I think that that's awesome in a way that you can be colleagues with someone or peers or friends and still be able to give them that honest assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's key, right? Having friends who will tell you that you're nuts sometimes, or to say, man, you're totally off base here, or this is bad and you're capable of more. Like you need that. You need that so much. It's actually why I like a certain YouTuber so much, who I believe was a former Chatting with Nuts guest.
Would his name happen to be Stevie Donahue?
It would be old Stevie from South Boston. And I like it because like he and I talk all the time. We talk about writing projects and stuff, and he just like unleashes criticism on me, and then we laugh about it, right? And it's great. And yet I take it all to heart, and that stuff's really important. You need that with friends.
Yeah, and sometimes the people who I disagree with the most are the people that I love talking to the most. Like Alan is one of my best friends in the entire world, and we disagree on a plethora of books. But I even when I disagree with him, I love hearing his take because he thinks very carefully about what he doesn't like. Like he's very particular about things he doesn't like, and when he points them out and he says them with such conviction, I'm just like, oh, like seeing it through that side of things is so interesting to me. And even Murphy, who's become a really good friend of mine, we don't really like the same books all the time. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we're perfectly aligned, and that's awesome. But Alan said you don't like anything I like. That's not totally true. We both like stoner because we're both dude bros. Excuse me while I move the goalpost, folks, as Steve would say. Yeah, I think that some of that gets lost in the age of tribalism and setting your feet into the ground and not being willing to move or even hear the other side of the equation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we need it. It's like disagreement is one of the things that makes life actually more interesting, especially for something about books. And to see someone make a really like an impassioned case for why something was good when you didn't get it, I mean, it's so much more. It's so much more fun.
I think it also lends itself to opening up your eyes to other walks of life, even and people's experiences. And one of the biggest eye-opening experiences for me when it comes to just hearing people's different perspectives was Berserk. And what I thought at the time when I was reading, I'm like, how am I going to talk about this thing? I feel like it's so voyeuristic. And then having people who had experienced similar trauma that goes on in the books, at least in some, realistic fashion, hearing their perspective really changed my thoughts on it and made me just realize that maybe sometimes I should listen instead of talk, which is another thing that when you learn that, I feel like a whole world opens up to you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And sometimes you have to understand that when you're very forceful in your criticism, there is going to be a certain amount of people who get offended by it, right? And some of the times that's because they're closed-minded, but other times it's just because it's important to them, and it's a very natural reaction to and while you don't want, we could talk about the exact ethics of when it's okay to get offended by these sorts of things or something like that. You understand that it just also means sometimes you're going to clash, and sometimes we can all try to be nice and polite and stuff, but when we fundamentally, like, when we care about things and we put them in really strong terms, it's just not going to be for everybody all the time.
Yeah, for sure. And books are a very emotional experience at times. And sometimes that's hard to separate. And I actually have books that I feel very strongly about emotionally. And I don't talk about them as much because I don't know if I can handle a real open discussion. Not maybe handle's not the right word, but I don't really want to put out I don't want to be unapproachable about things. And sometimes to defend your stance, you might have to open up a really personal piece of yourself, and you just aren't willing to do that in front of a couple thousand people. And
that's
tricky sometimes.
That part too. I also just think, I've had people tell me straight up about why The Dispossessed is a bad book, and I think it's very nice of them to be so open with me because it makes they've already done all the work of proving themselves wrong. And I don't have to now go through it and explain to them exactly why they're wrong. I just know, but no, but I mean, it's actually nice to see it, and even thoughtful critique of your favorite books can be helpful. It can be helpful.
Yeah, it can also make you reassess the way you're defending, and maybe you don't change your mind, but maybe your defense changes a little bit. I've had those conversations a bazillion times with the Song of Ice and Fire. I have moved, like, with that, I'm so in it that I'm more interested in the conversations within the story rather than about the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just because I'm all the way in, so I'm not so concerned if someone doesn't like Feast for Crows. I don't really care necessarily. I would rather talk about the things that happen in the book and dissect those specifically.
Because you're like a real Gurm fan. Like you're
my boy. That's my dude. It's hard. It's hard sometimes to be the Gurm guy. But his stories have impacted me greatly, and I'm still reading through his catalog and still finding stuff I love. I mean, Sand Kings is one of my favorite short stories ever now, and I just think it's just excellent. But I hear criticism of George all the time. Some of it's warranted too, and it's always interesting to hear other people's perspectives. Actually, the way me and Alan ended up doing a Chatting with Us is that he hated book 4 and 5 so much that I said, "I'll change your mind." And I brought him on with the whole purpose of being like, let's change your mind about this. And
that's very interesting. I've read A Song of Ice and Fire, and I watched the TV show at first, and then I started to read them, and I actually like them. I like them like a good bit. But I just have no interest in going back to them until the book's coming out, right? But for instance, I read the Dunk and Egg like novellas, like the book there. I liked it. I thought it was good. I thought those stories were good. I thought they were good. There's no way I was going to read whatever the like history
Fire and
was for
Blood.
this book. Yeah, there's just like you know, you can only take me so far.
Yeah, leave that
But
one for me. I'll tackle it. Don't worry.
but you know, I read them and I thought they were good. Um, it was a while ago though. You know, this was like I think I started watching the TV show like season 2 or something like that, and like immediately after I finished season 1, I was like, all right, I gotta read the books, and you know, bought the box set, and that was like right before whatever book 5 is called. That's how that's how long it's been.
A Dance of Dragons, yeah.
And that was like right before it came out, and I liked that enough that I had a pre-ordered copy coming from Amazon, but I was like out of town for like a week, like the day it came out, and I just like went to a bookstore and bought it so that I could read it. Like I was
Wow.
excited enough about it, right? But man, yeah, getting really into A Song of Ice and Fire now would just be a really hard sell for me. I don't actually have any ill feelings about Martin not finishing the series if that ends up being the way it goes. I just don't think I would bother to reread it unless
Would you
or
say
to dive
ending,
deep.
yeah, do you feel like endings are very important for you to kind of have the overall experience?
I don't know, actually. You know, it's more I don't need the final ending so much as like there is so much that kind of gets complicated in A Dance with Dragons.
Yeah.
It feels like I mean, this is precisely like why he can't finish it, it seems, or like why he says he's struggling. But like so many, there's a reason the show cut out so many plot lines, right? They had to simplify it so much. It is such a complex story by that time. I'd like to see like some of them get resolved. I'd like to eventually understand like some of those prologues.
I like the way you stated that. I've always said that the most impressive thing for me about A Dance of Dragons is that George essentially sets up an entirely new city / continent that has a totally different way of working, and he does it all in that book pretty much. And
Yeah.
that to me is so impressive, but it's also very evident that it's a challenging thing to continue. And to get them where they need to go. And then there's the 5-year gap stuff. There's all this other stuff that kind of goes into it. But for me, I'm not an ending person. I am so I just finished Under the Dome by Stephen King, and I had ups and downs with the book, but everyone told me how terrible the ending for Under the Dome was. And I feel weird because I'm like, it wasn't a great ending, but I'm like,
yeah,
it was okay. Like, whatever.
I mean, so a science fiction writer that I quite like is Neil Stevenson, who is sort of notorious for not having great endings. My favorite book by Stevenson is Anathem, and that probably has the best ending that I know of in his books. But for instance, Seven Eves, which I think is a fantastic work of science fiction. I love that book. The end, the last 20 pages shouldn't have been the last 20 pages. They needed like another 50 pages to, I mean, you just read it and it's not an ending. So I guess you could say I can love books that don't have amazing endings or don't even really end. That's kind of the thing with Stevenson books. It's like, it's not so much that the books end, it's just that he stopped writing. It seems sometimes.
He just did, I'm done with this.
Yeah. And I know King is also sort of notorious for bad endings. And I haven't read a lot of King, but I'll say this. I don't know if this is first hot take of the night or something. I think the ending of The Dark Tower is good. So
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah.
There's certain little things that I wish were different, but on the whole, I felt great when I finished the series. And I almost feel like it's a cliche now for like King to be slammed for endings, and he does have some stinkers, but the man's written so many books. They're bound to be some stinkers in there. But for me, I think Pet Sematary has a great ending. I love 11/22/63's ending. I think Salem's Lot ending is fine. I don't hate the Stand ending anywhere near as many people do. And like Under the Dome's ending is wild, and I can see why some people don't like it, but I also wouldn't categorize it as terrible. But I'm weird because I am very forgiving about.
I would say I think the ending of the Dark Tower is particularly interesting because King, who's not known for this, basically makes the argument that the entire 7-book series is justified for a very minor character development on the behalf of Roland.
It is a brave move, and I applaud bravery. So
and it's literally like the moral of the ending is like Roland learned to like other people a little bit more. Not enough to give up on his dreams, but to like them a little bit more, to take 15 seconds on a hill to pick something up. And that's the ending. And you go, okay, cool. you know.
It made me want to reread. I said, I'll come
Yeah,
back to this someday.
yeah,
And I just need to hear Eddie Dean talk one more time. I mean, what a guy.
yeah.
What an absolute unit. I actually had Neil Stevenson on my list here because I know that you have talked about Anathem is how you say it, right? Anathem?
Yeah, I say Anathem. I used to say Anathema, but I don't know.
I never know how to pronounce anything. And then Snow Crash has they've been mentioned, like you said, they kind of come up whenever you're making videos. And I was wondering if you can give me like I need the push to start Stevenson because there's so many books of his to try out, and I think I have. Oh, what do I have? Termination Shock. Is that a Neil Stevenson book?
That is, yeah.
Yeah, I have that.
So here's the push I would give you. Like, Stevenson is one of the most bold living science fiction writers writing today. And I say that because every book or every series, because sometimes he'll write like a trilogy or something, is different. So there are certain things that come up more and more. He likes computer hackers, and stuff like this. But what is really interesting is that like Stevenson gets a big, interesting idea and then writes a book about it. And then he's like, cool, I now have to find another big, interesting idea. To like put it lightly, like Seven Eves is essentially about the moon is destroyed. You learn that in the first page. We don't know why. And now there's going to be huge cataclysmic effects because the moon is destroyed. How can humanity survive? Okay, cool. That's the pitch for Seven Eves. For Snow Crash, it's like, how would you feel about a computer virus? Like everyone that lives in virtual reality, and there's like this computer virus that can like kill you is like real because you're in virtual reality and it's like stuff like this. And just like early explorations of like something like a metaverse, right? That's a cool, interesting, big idea. Also, I think the main character's name is Hero Protagonist, which is a funny name.
I could see people hating that. I won't, but I can see
yeah.
people getting very upset about that.
And then Anathem, which is great. It's basically about like philosopher monks in like an alternate reality who have to figure out some kind of big mystery in their world, but also they're gonna like spend 30 pages arguing about whether or not numbers exist. And I was so into that book, man. Yeah, that book scratched a lot of itches for me.
That one sounds like I would like to see if I would enjoy it. Snow Crash, I've always heard there's people who obviously hate it, but it sounds like something I would enjoy. And Nick actually brings up something here. He says, Jimmy, you should love him as a fellow programmer and nerd. Stevenson is king of the nerds. So I think I will have some. Alan hates the hero protagonist name. Oh, that's incredible. I think that I would probably like Snow Crash. I'm very curious about Anathem. I would like to try that as well. I think I have the Diamond Age by him or something like that.
Yeah. And then also I would say the Baroque cycle as like a trilogy is great as like historical fiction. Bridger is a big fan, like the Library Ladder he really likes that too. And he has very good taste. I trust his taste more than I trust my taste. And he likes Baroque cycle quite a bit. And that's great. It's an interesting game to take these like sort of famous mathematicians and scientists and stuff and turn them into, your main characters. It's great.
Yeah. Baroque Cycle is one that I remember watching him talk about it, or maybe me and him talked about it in our chat, and I bought it immediately. I was like, that sounds very interesting. And I think I even read the first few chapters of it. Just anytime I get a book in, I actually always try to read some pages of it, even if I'm not going to get to it immediately. And I really liked it a lot. And I think it's Baroque Cycle that has to do with economics, right?
There is economics involved, but there's a lot of alchemy stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Because it's following around. Is Isaac Newton in that book? Is that right?
Isaac Newton is in that book, and so is Leibniz.
Yeah, that's the one.
Because they're arguing over who invented calculus.
So, if you could pick out of all of them to start with, Stevenson, where would you start?
Snow Crash is the slimmest of all of them, I think, and so you can kind of just get a quick feel for it. The thing is that Stevenson changes his style so much. The only thing that doesn't change with Stevenson from book to book is that he writes a lot of words. He is like a maximalist on the page. And so, okay, in Seven Eves, sometimes you're going to have 7 pages explaining the dynamics of jet fuel. And then in Anathem, sometimes 2 characters are going to pause and just talk about the existence of numbers and stuff like this. And I don't know. I like them all, but at least all the ones that I've read. I kind of want you to just read Anthem though, because I love it so much. It's in my top science fiction. It's the only thing from Stevenson that made the top, and I just love it, man. Yeah, I love it.
Well, I'm gonna order both, and I'll flip a coin, and I'll see.
Okay.
Actually, I already know. I'm gonna read the shorter one because I've just been like allergic to long books lately.
Yeah, that's
I've
fair.
been reading them, but I've just been struggling for some reason. I think it's because my attention's being pulled in so many different directions, which is like the common problem being a reader that likes a lot of different genres.
Yeah, totally.
Like this month alone, I think I've read historical fiction. I'm reading literary fiction.
Mhm.
Both of them were Pulitzer winners, which was an accident. And then I have sci-fi and fantasy and nonfiction. Like I've been reading a lot of
Yeah,
stuff.
that happens. I mean, I think I have just a pile of books that I recently bought on the piano bench here, and I think if you just went through this, I've got some like philosophy there. I've got a bunch of George Orwell stuff. I've got two biographies, one of Mary Wollstonecraft and then one of Mary Shelley and Mary Wollstonecraft.
Nice.
I've got a book called Main Currents of Marxism, which is this like comprehensive like history of Marxism, along with a book on the history of libertarianism called Radicals for Capitalism. I put them next to each other so that they could fight while I wasn't looking. Uh, uh, and behind me I've got like Emerson and stuff like I've just got it stuff. And I like this comic series of Crazy Cats, George Herman's Crazy Cat, just like behind me, just hanging out on the piano. So
My
I get
wife
it. I
just
mean,
bought
you just
the cat book from Scalzi. You mentioned cats, and John
oh
Scalzi
yeah,
wrote some cat book, and she was like, "I have to
yeah.
buy this." I'm like, "Let's do
Oh
it."
yeah. I don't like John Scalzi, but I don't enjoy John Scalzi's books.
I've actually never read any of them. I've heard, as many authors, you hear different things from different people. I've just never really looked into where to begin with him or which one I would like to. What of his stuff have you read?
I think that I can't remember all this. I think I've read at least 3 books. I think I read. Did he write Old Man's War? Is that a Scalzi book?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Someone in the chat should correct me if he didn't write Old Man's War. And then I recently read Kaiju Preservation Society, which came out like last year, and I hated that book so much. I hated that book
Not a
so
fan,
much.
huh?
Oh my gosh. I don't talk about books I don't like on my channel. I don't know if you've ever noticed. I don't do book reviews. I don't do books I hated or something like this. But I guess we're on Chatting with Nuts. There's no hold bar here. Like
Yeah. Let's hear the real. Let's hear the
yeah.
real story.
I thought that basically um I thought that Kaiju Preservation Society has a very interesting premise, and there were some parts about this, but Scalzi's tone is like it's so grating the entire time, where the narrator will like pause to tell you that like a character that is obviously evil is evil, and like
Mm.
we should know that he's evil, and like just wants to really let you know that he's evil. And there's just like so much of that. It happens over and over and over, and I was like, I hate when fiction feels like it has to like really make itself clear to me. I want it to trust me as a reader slightly, and I don't think Scalzi trusts his readers fundamentally.
I think that's something I've become more sensitive to lately. Is noticing when authors are not. They think I'm dumb.
Yeah.
And I'm dumb, to be clear. But let
Yeah.
me pretend a little bit while I read about dragons, at least, right?
Yeah. I and this is one of the reasons I love Le Guin so much, is that Le Guin like very clearly has politics, very clearly has ethical views, very clearly held them strongly. There's this great clip of Le Guin at like a science fiction conference, and she's like, um, she's like giving a talk about Hemingway, or someone's talking about Hemingway, and she just barges into it and just goes, "I want you to know that Hemingway is." I won't swear on this. I don't want you to get demonetized. But it's like Hemingway is BS and unjust, and then like adds that's like he's a bad writer. Like she just occasionally would just say this, right? And in interviews and stuff, she's like much more. Um, she's much more didactic, but in her fiction, she clearly is presenting her view, but she's not gonna like tell you over and over and over that you have to believe it, even though she thinks you should. And there's a kind of respect for the readers there. She described her work sometimes as holding open a door so that you could peer through it and see what another world would be like. And I think that's a really good way of describing it. And I think it makes it a much more pleasant reading experience.
Yeah, I think you can look at a lot of the great authors. Actually, specifically some of the new wave people that you mentioned in your Le Guin video, like Octavia Butler,
Mhm.
that kind of leaves some of these things open for us to chew on, and I think that is really important. And there's a bunch of Taoism in Le Guin's works, and
Mhm.
also Jungian. I always say this wrong. Is it with Jungian principles or ideas?
Like, yeah, I would say Jungian. Jung is how I
Jung,
would
yeah.
usually say it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, exactly. Octavia Butler, if you read Parable of the Talents, Parable of the Sower, whew, Parable of the Sower especially gets dark really, 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 really fast. And she never bothers to like have the narrator stop and say, and what these people did to us was bad. Like she
yeah,
doesn't have to write that sentence, right? Because the description of the events makes it clear, right? And that's enough, right? That's enough. The book
mhm.
is no less powerful and probably more powerful because of that.
Yeah, a silent consensus is what I would call it. That comes
Yeah,
from many readers that will never actually have to voice that because it's just kind of understood,
yeah,
and that makes if to me it makes it way more powerful.
yeah.
Matt says that Hemingway was the OG dude, bro, and that might be true.
It could be. Um, it could. He certainly made a template, right? I actually like. I liked reading Hemingway a lot more. I probably like him a little bit less now, but I do think he's um, clearly very talented, right? As like a prose stylist and things. So I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to take that away, right?
Mhm.
Just really quick, I did see in the chat someone asked if I'm a philosophy professor.
Yes, if it's
So
Heidi, yes.
yeah, so I'm not a philosophy professor. I have a PhD in philosophy, but I left academia and then I went into the tech world uh, after I finished my PhD. But I am a philosopher, and so for better or worse. Yeah,
It's probably for better, right? It makes you
yeah, yeah,
more informed, and I think your channel is interesting because of that. I mean, obviously, you talk about philosophy, you talk about reading, you talk about writing, and you talk about journaling. Is there one of those things that you prefer to make videos about over the other?
Well, I guess in some ways you might think that like everything I talk about in some way is talking about philosophy. So in some way, it's like all tied into this larger philosophy project, right?
Mhm.
Um, so for instance, talking about like journaling, I talk about Aristotle and like having a narrative for your life and these sort of philosophical views about this and stuff. And I think in the future, everything I do will be more overtly philosophical. Like I'll probably never do like another top 10 fantasy like book list or something like this. Um, which is fine. My big thing actually is that there's probably people who know it much better than me and like for whom it like matters more. Um, because since I don't only read fantasy, like this is not the only person, right? But like Philip Chase exists, right? And so the world does not need me in that to make more fantasy videos. uh, 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 um, and like similarly, like Media Death Cult will explain science fiction to the world in a way that like probably I would not are like fit to be read is like very thorough. And I mean, there's tons of good science fiction YouTubers. And so you just don't need that as much. And while there are other philosophy channels, I think one, it's kind of shocking to me that only a couple of like professional philosophers that I know ever bother to make philosophy stuff on YouTube. I think it's like an open market. We should, people could do well if they put some real thought into it. And that the things I want to talk about in philosophy are a little bit different than the stuff other philosophy channels talk about. And so I think, mostly it's philosophy. Though obviously if you look at my channel, the stuff that has done the best for me is journaling content. Journaling content is the stuff that people actually want to see.
Yeah, I watched your video of top 5 ways to journal and why you
Mhm.
should, and
Yeah.
I'm still not convinced I should. And this is my problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's two things. One is I don't know if my life warrants journaling because like
Mhm.
my day to day is so routine. Like I can tell you exactly what I'm going to do this week for the most part. So for me, I end up feeling silly, almost depressing when I look at what my life has amounted to. And then the second thing is, and I thought this was interesting because I love the point where you said it gives you a reason to think about yourself.
Mhm.
But you said in a judgment free way. But the only time I have ever journaled, And this like jogged my memory back to this. In elementary school, we were supposed to journal, and I journaled like I was supposed to. And I remember the teacher reading my journal, and they were extremely concerned with the negative way I viewed myself. And this is in 4th grade. This is like right when I'm starting to figure out how to write, how to read. And she was like, you see yourself in a very negative way. Like she was taken back. Like, you shouldn't see yourself this way. So I feel like whenever I sit down to write about myself at any point, it's always, I'm just beating myself up.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I get this concern. You're wrong, but I get the concern. Let me
okay. All right.
Here's actually the video of mine that I would want you to watch, but I'll walk you through the main point so I can save you 6.5 minutes. And it's the video called "How to Journal Like a Philosopher." And here's what I talk about. Here's the simple format that I recommend for most people to do for journaling. That is kind of my default if I don't know what to write. Okay, I don't always stick to this, but here's what I would recommend. Just take set aside like 10 minutes. You're going to just for 10 minutes tops at first, right? You're going to write a little bit about your day, right? And you're just going to chronicle like something that happened. Like, what is the big event of the day? And every day pretty much always has a big event. You might say it doesn't, but you should think about this, right?
Creatine shake.
Yeah. I was gonna say, obviously today's big event is talking to me.
Clearly.
and then I would ask, like, the next paragraph is to write about something in that event, like how that you did well. Okay, you have to have something positive, and you almost always will, right? The example I had was like I had like this minor flare up at work, and what was the thing that I did really well, right? And what I said was like I did some stuff that I had learned in therapy years ago, because I'm a very anxious person by nature, and that was to like take the problem, break it into smaller problems, and figure out how I was going to solve each small problem, so I would cumulatively kind of figure out the big problem, right? Mm-hmm. And then the next part is to write a paragraph about what didn't go well, like what did you not do well in that instance. For some types of people, writing that first paragraph is much easier than writing the second. For a kind of person that I'm talking to right now, writing the second paragraph is the easy part, right?
Yeah.
And so you might even want to flip the order, but I do think it's important that you write both. And then the next paragraph is to kind of take that step, that meta reflection, and to think about, like, for that thing that I did well, has it always been the case that I've done it like that? Or is this like, is this actually, did I improve in some capacity? For the thing I did poorly, have I made progress on that? Have I actually gone backwards, right? And it's actually kind of placed it in this larger narrative. And I think at first it feels uncomfortable, but over time you get more used to it, and it actually helps you be more reflective. And so actually you don't have to write about your whole day. And your whole day actually ends up being about you end up writing about your whole life on every page, even though even though you're really starting off with a paragraph about the day.
Okay. You've pushed me a little bit into this direction. Okay.
That's the thing I would try, right? But I do think one of the big concerns that I have and why I would say, like, why I won't actually say that absolutely everyone in the entire world should journal, right? Is that for some people, this is not fixed for them, but it can happen, right? That for them, it's going to be very easy to just get caught in like a loop of like a negativity loop, right? And to only write the negative stuff. This is why I say you got to write the positive stuff in there too. If you find yourself incapable of doing that, probably you're better off not journaling for a little while
and seeing a therapist.
Yeah. You know, talk to somebody, man. Talk to somebody.
My cats, they listen, but they never say anything good.
But also, sometimes in my journal, I write basically the darkest stuff I can think of, right? And I just like got to get it out. You know, I got to say it to somebody, and I can't say it. And, or I can write it for myself, and just getting it on the page and looking at it actually lets me kind of evaluate it slightly better than if it was just kind of rummaging around in my head.
Yeah, maybe it's like when you write your first draft of a piece of fiction and you stuff it in a drawer for 3 months and come back to it, and you know it's brand new. Maybe possibly if I were to journal, maybe I would be like, hey, I shouldn't be so hard on myself. Like, I was really negative this day. Why did I do that? Maybe there would be some perspective change there.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I do think a big thing is that people don't review their journals enough, right? They don't go back and look at them. And then it just kind of, and I actually think going back and reading your journals is pretty valuable. I went back a couple of months ago and reread a journal from like my freshman year of college. And man, was I an idiot.
I say, were your worries much different? I imagine they were.
Yeah, so different. And man, did not understand the world at all. But I wonder what's it going to be like if I do it in 10 years and then read my current journals, right?
Hmm.
Who knows? Who knows, right? But you
Yeah,
have to keep the record if you want to be able to do that.
I'm glad I didn't journal in my early 20s because that would have been not great. Would have been maybe even possibly incriminating for some of the activities I was up to. But I think you make a good case for it. And I do enjoy the journaling videos, even though I don't do them. It always feels like something I'm putting off to try. And I know my friend Joanna is massively into journaling as well. And she has spoke many times to me about the benefits for her. And some of them are very similar to what you're saying. So maybe you two are onto something.
She's a wise and thoughtful person. I think I you get the sense from watching her videos. She's reflective. She's interesting. She's clearly putting thought into this. Yeah, and I think you should listen to her.
Yeah, and she's right here. She says, yes, it's interesting not just to read what you did, but to read how you thought. I think that's the scary part at some point for me is thinking about that. We did have a good question that I wanted to highlight from Books, Songs, and Other Magic. I said, Jared, what's your main interest in philosophy? You alluded to a particular thread in your interest.
Yeah, so when I was working on my PhD, my main interests were like philosophy of language and logic. My dissertation was on theories of truth and semantics and the semantics of the word true in English, which is not actually that interesting for most people, but that's what I was working on. But when I left academia, I kind of went through this like minor crisis where I didn't really like philosophy anymore. Or I felt like I had abandoned it, right, by leaving academia. That's really hard to leave academia. Like it's a very strange culture where when you leave, everyone kind of views like you gave up or something. And yeah, I mean it's weird. And it took me a little bit of time to get used to it again. And what ended up happening is that I started reading much more ancient philosophy. So I read way more Aristotle. I read the Stoics like all the time. And I'm really interested in just questions like philosophical questions about, how to be a better person in like, not like the self-help life hack kind of style, but the sort of like, how do you meaningfully become a better person? Right. I'm working on a video, hopefully will be out this month. Who knows? My output has slowed down so much lately, but hopefully it will be out this month on basically like if you were going to put like a step-by-step plan for how to be happy from the Stoics, from like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Musonius Rufus, Seneca, Cicero, people like this, what would it look like? Right. And I've been working on this video for like a while. And I've been really happy with it. I'm really happy like diving in there. And I think the answers end up being pretty obvious when you hear them, but you need someone to tell you. And that's the kind of stuff I end up reading the most. I also have some interest in like political philosophy, but I hate talking about politics with people. So I don't talk about it like on YouTube or something like this, but like I read that stuff a lot. I read, mostly kind of in those areas. So like much more practical areas instead of like the sort of theoretical areas that I worked on for my PhD.
Having like, a real education in this and studying and accomplishing stuff like to get a PhD is incredible anyways. But do you feel like with the rise of YouTube and social media and other movements, what is the most misinterpreted philosophy and philosopher today?
What's the missing? Oh, well, I mean, I think that some people think, for instance, that philosophy is like by its nature irrelevant, right? And I just think that's wrong.
Lawrence Krauss is a big believer of this. He's one of my favorite physicists. He is not a fan of philosophy.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of Lawrence Krauss, so I guess it goes both ways. So, I mean, I think that's one of it. But also, I think part of it is like if you look at like YouTube content about philosophy, it's like super heavy on the existentialist. It's super heavy on Nietzsche, on nihilism, stuff like antinatalism, which is like not a thing that would get brought up in most like philosophy departments or something. Would get like a hearing on YouTube or something. It's much more depressive, basically. And I think it's like if you look at my numbers, like my analytics for when I do when I do like a straightforward philosophy video, it's 18 to 25-year-old men. It's like 95% men, 80% 18 to 25, something like this. And if I had to characterize the comments they leave, I would add that they are all depressed. and like and part of the reason I make that kind of content is because I think they need something, right? They need to hear from someone, and that there's better stuff out there, and that they don't have to get trapped in this like life is meaningless, alas, existence is absurd kind of view. That there are other alternative ways that they could be spoken to as well, in maybe a way that is not quite as odious as, let's say, certain kinds of people who like to speak to a young male crowd tend to be, right? And so my kind of goal is to talk to them about philosophy for a lot of ways, but without what seems to be the almost inevitable radicalization that seems to happen, from a lot of other people.
Existentialism is argued to not be a philosophy at some point, right?
I mean, some people might say that, but like they were philosophers. So I mean, like they were philosophers talking about philosophy stuff. And I tend to, be very permissive about what I would count as a philosophy as well. So that probably helps. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of bad actors will use philosophy as a way of backing up a certain image or idea that they are selling.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So let's talk about a book that I really like, a book that's sitting right over there. I could have to get up to show it, but Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. Let's talk about this for a minute. As soon as I mentioned Marcus Aurelius, I saw a couple of people go like, "Oh no, Marcus Aurelius."
Alan hates Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah. And look, one of the things that has happened very clearly is that people who very clearly have never read Marcus Aurelius will hold up that book and be like, "This is the best book in the world," and and they'll be like, "This is the book every young man should read," and then when they try to explain what Marcus Aurelius talks about in that book, they just completely whiff it. I'm talking, and the Meditations is not a difficult book to read. It's actually a series of journals written by Marcus Aurelius to himself. It is not hard. Thank you very much, Alan. But it is not that hard to read the Meditations. So it's not like you're trying to hit a fastball here, or even like a knuckleball. It's this is t-ball, right? To summarize this. So
yes.
so read the dang book and then explain it to me, right? Or then explain it. And so like a lot of like sort of manosphere-ish kind of types will talk about this. They'll be like, Marcus Aurelius says this, and you just like say, no, he doesn't. That's the answer is, it's not like, oh, you've misunderstood him. It's either that you are like so unfathomably unintelligent that like I can't possibly believe that this, or you're a liar. And it actually ends up being that lying is the more charitable interpretation of what they're saying, because of how badly they misdescribe this.
Wow. I have never read it, but I've seen it quoted on more lifting videos than I've ever seen any other.
Absolutely. When I make Stoic content, for instance, I suddenly will get all these videos about like 10 Stoic truths you need to know, and it's like shown with like dudes lifting, and they'll be like, take cold showers, and you go like, Marcus really
don't even get me started on this cold shower nonsense.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh God.
I have to say, someone said they like Marcus Aurelius as an emperor. Marcus Aurelius is the last good emperor, according to Machiavelli, when Machiavelli lists the good emperors of Rome. But Alan, I have to say, is right here. For a long time, the emperors of Rome had this really great tradition of not just giving the emperor, like giving power to their sons. For instance, Marcus inherits from his uncle, right? And many times what you have is you'd be adopted so that you could be the heir of the emperor. And it was actually a way of choosing the best emperor, right? It's actually what, fun fact, this is what Japanese companies do to this day. There's this huge amount of like big Japanese companies that go son to son to son, or like father to son, father to son, father to son. They will actually adopt people, right? So that they can keep this. It's like a status thing. And this isn't like every Japanese company, but it's like some major Japanese companies have done this. And what I would say is that Marcus should not have made Commodus his heir. Yeah, I like Alan.
You're making Alan's day, man.
But Marcus should not have made Commodus his heir. Marcus was already inheriting a tough situation, I think, in the Roman Empire. I mean, and we could talk about how much I actually care if the Roman Empire fell or not. But Commodus was not a good uh, Commodus was not a good emperor, and this was a profound lack of judgment on Marx's part.
Well, Commodus is very close to communist, so I think we can all get. No, I'm just kidding. You're only gonna get that level of analysis right here on the network, folks. I mean, come on. Oh man, it's just so interesting to hear you talk about like philosophy and reading in the same sentence, because one of the things that you talk about on your channel is things that got you back in the reading. And you mentioned Terry Pratchett, and you mentioned Le Guin, and two other people that I'm forgetting at the moment. But you say one of the reasons why you stopped reading is because you were reading so much philosophy in school. And my first question that came to my mind when I heard you say that so many months ago was, well, what made you love reading in the first place?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I loved reading from a really young age. I was a pretty voracious reader from a young age, and I was just the right age for Harry Potter. So, and that was just like this cultural moment, right? And so that got to be a big thing. But I kind of just like stopped reading in college, except for stuff I got assigned, right? Except for, I read A Song of Ice and Fire. I remember there were a few novels that really stand out that I read in college. And when I went to grad school, all I was reading was philosophy for school or like for research. And I would read a ton of that stuff, but I wasn't reading for fun or for pleasure anymore. And in a way that it just wasn't, I don't know. It wasn't what I wanted to spend my time on. I played a lot of video games back then. I watched a lot of movies. I used to be like a bigger film buff than I am now. I don't even own a TV anymore.
What's your favorite film?
It depends on which Kurosawa film I've seen last. so like that's usually ends up being Ikiru might be my favorite film. Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah. But I love Seven Samurai so much. So yeah, and I also really love Synecdoche, New York. Philip Seymour Hoffman's my favorite actor, I think. So that I mean, just I'm gonna name the most pretentious stuff ever. I thought the first Hangover movie was funny when I first saw it, so don't worry. Like we're supposed to. I'm a man of the people, but and like Animal House is still good. I don't know what I need to say to make sure that people know that I'm a real guy, but yeah. But anyway, I see, these are the thoughts that are running through my head while I'm actually filming videos, and I don't make jokes in my videos.
Well, that's what this is for.
Yeah. But and so I just like wasn't reading like at all. And then at some point I was decided like I should just start reading it. I should just give it a shot again, right? And I don't exactly know why I started doing it. But I just did. And then I hit this like weird thing where, let's see, like in like a 3-month span, I read The Dispossessed and at least one other Le Guin novel. I can't remember which one though. Crime and Punishment, which ended up being this huge like monumental moment for me as well. And it was not the first time I read Pratchett, but it was when I started reading the Guards, like the City Watch, and I started with Guards, and I was like, yeah, like Discworld gets so much better when you get to City Watch, man. So,
Alan and you should be best friends. like honestly, I can feel Alan pumping his fist all the way from here in the north as he's down in Florida. Like, it's just so funny. Alan's losing his mind. Says, what is happening right now? You two should chat sometime. I think you would have a great time.
I want people to know, man, when people call me pretentious in my comments or hear this because I talk about philosophy or something like that, man, I read a lot of like comedic fantasy novels too. Like I read exactly Sam Vimes rules. Sam Vimes is like who I want to be like as a father, right? As you see like later on, he's a fantastic dad. He's a fantastic father, and you see that just running back home as fast as he can to make sure that he can read the same book to his son because his son needs to hear it to fall asleep. It's like this heartbreaking moment. But yeah, I love Pratchett. Pratchett's great, and I guess Alan and I are gonna have to talk sometime. Yeah, Alan, you should send me an email or something. We'll talk sometime. But I love this stuff. I love Pratchett. I've got this recent book about Pratchett somewhere that actually Steve Donahue sent me. It's like a new release about Pratchett's like other writing, and I got it because I'm supposed to possibly write a review of it. We'll see if I get around to it.
So do you write reviews? Because I know you don't do them on your channel.
I've thought about starting to write them. I have a Substack. People should subscribe. Jared Henderson.substack.com. But I've been thinking about doing book reviews as I read them. But it wouldn't be like for new releases. I can't keep up with new releases.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
very tough.
But like, oh yeah, keep going.
I was saying I struggle to read new releases as well, even though I'd like to do more of them because they're topical.
Yeah. So we could talk about this for a second, but that's the reason I don't do book reviews on YouTube, and it's because no one watches them, and no one watches them, and I don't watch them myself.
Why is that?
Never.
Why not? Let me guess. You're like, I know better.
It's not quite that. It's not quite that. But like, okay, so a lot of people who do book reviews on YouTube are not doing book reviews. Okay, in the like sort of traditional sense, right? They very often fail to tell you what the book is about, which is actually like a key component of a book review. But what they're doing is like a reader reaction video for the most part with some evaluation. And I think that is totally fine. I think that is a totally fine thing to make. I know so many people who make them, enjoy them, make friends from it, and all this stuff. And I think that's great. It's a community building thing, right? But for some reason, I have just never been compelled to watch those videos it's the same way that I don't like Goodreads. So
the best working website on the internet.
Yeah. Like I don't have a Goodreads account anymore at all, I think, but I don't like Goodreads, and I would never care about the reviews. And in person, I totally want to hear what people have to say about books. And if you and I were talking about books right now in this conversation, and you wanted to tell me about a book and like explain why it was good and stuff, I'd be totally into it because it feels very personal. But it's just not been the kind of content that I wanted to consume. But again, I see it as like, I think it's pretty cool that people are able to make these kind of connections, right? Through doing like booktube kind of stuff. But another reason that I don't do book reviews, frankly, is that I don't actually consider myself a booktuber. So like in the sense of like because I feel like I'm kind of adjacent, right? And there's some overlap, but I don't consider myself sort of a full-fledged booktube guy.
What if I told you booktuber is an imaginary constraint?
Well, I mean, possibly, in which case I feel even better about not feeling part of it. Like, right? I have lots of booktube friends, and I have, obviously I'm on the Fantasy Network right now. So, there's all this, but I just have never felt sort of bound to do the kind of standard booktube videos. And what I've found more and more is that I really enjoy, like storytelling in the edit. How does the edit tell? Like, how does the video actually tell a video or tell a story? Sorry, how does it actually tell a story while also teaching someone something? And I can do that with. I've been working out with Flossie. I think I did that with the Le Guin stuff, giving you sort of a story of her life, a story of her career, while also kind of evaluating stuff, right?
Yeah,
and the time it takes to make one of those videos is way higher than the time it takes to make a book review video. And if I'm going to make them, like the kind of videos that I want to make, I just have to like cut out a lot of other things that I could make, right? Because I could be pumping out reviews and lists 2 or 3 times a week if I were only doing that stuff, but it's not what I'm working on, right? It's not what I'm focusing on, so I can't do it. Yeah.
I mean, having a clear-cut idea of what you want to do is a great strength. There are times, when it's not chatting with nuts, I'm floundering of like, what do I want to spend my time doing? And I split my time in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
So it's made me kind of reevaluate what I want to spend time on. So lately it's been really the monthly kind of wrap-ups, which are just a blast to do, honestly. I know a lot of people do them, but they really are just a lot of fun. And I do enjoy watching those videos from people. And then obviously this show, right?
Yeah.
And doing that. But I don't think anyone should feel any certain way they have to do, for people who maybe are watching this thing about starting a channel. You don't have to do book reviews. You don't have to do any any of that if you don't
Yeah,
want to.
here's the thing. This is something I want more people to do. I'm putting out a call, right? Sorry, my cat's here, so you're gonna see a random tail or something, or she's gonna climb on me. But I look at how film YouTube talks about films, right?
Mhm.
Look about how comics YouTube can, when it's really good, talks about comics, and look about like all these other, or like TV YouTube, how they do it, right?
Mhm.
They'll do these, like, tell these stories. They'll use lots of like cut, like they'll, you know what I mean? Some booktroopers should try doing that. It's what I was trying to do with the Le Guin stuff, and I think like Media Death Cult right now is like really leaning into this for science fiction stuff. But I would just encourage people to try that. And I think the big thing here is to just say that it's a way of experimenting, right? It's a way of trying something new. It's a way to feel like there's no like one right way to do booktube or whatever, or to talk about books on YouTube,
Yeah.
right? So I would say experiment with this. Maybe actually you'll discover that video editing, for instance, is your real passion. And that,
It is not mine.
yeah,
It is,
but
that's the one thing I learned.
like I learned that I actually really love editing. I love editing. I can get lost in editing in the same way that I can get lost in writing.
Wow.
And I feel good about it, right? So I wouldn't want to edit other people's stuff, but I feel really good about editing my own stuff, at least more and more. So
Yeah, I think it can be whatever you want to make it. I think the one thing that's unique about books is it seems that there's just a conversation going on, and I think sometimes people just want to be a part of that conversation, and that's so cool that you can do that in this little kind of corner of YouTube. And it's something that, while it can be uniform, is actually unique to this space. And I think that that's really great. It's almost actually flexing the more of the social media aspect of YouTube rather than just the entertainment kind of post and forget type deal.
that's true. That's true. And again, this is why like there are actually some people whose like weekly updates I watch, right?
Mhm.
I watched Joanna's most recent update video because she talked about Babel 17. That was good. And I was seeing here, like for some people, it's just a way to have a conversation about books, right? And YouTube is just the thing that facilitates that. Um, um, and that's fine, right? It's just not the thing that drew me.
Yeah,
Into
exactly. Yeah,
being a
and
YouTuber.
that's the whole thing, right? Is that you can have different motivations for doing. There's no right way of doing it, I guess, is what we're kind of saying. A journey for the pages says, apart from Jimmy, of course, thank you. The best person I'm using for actual in-depth book reviews is books are better than food. And I saw some other people say this. I am actually I'm going to attempt to get him on the show.
Oh, okay.
I've talked to him just briefly, nothing super personal, but I'm hoping that possibly I can have him in the future.
Yeah. I don't watch a ton of his stuff, but I do watch some of them. And yeah, so I do, I guess I do watch some book reviews. Also, I should say, when it comes to conversations, I'm filming something like tomorrow with Philip about Book of the New Sun. So I do it sometimes, I guess. I just wouldn't do it myself.
Well, I'm glad you're doing Book of the New Sun, because for me, I've been in book 2 for a while. I just finished book 2, so I've been reading it for a while, and I absolutely love it. And seeing you mention it got me fired up. I'd love to hear your take, because it's kind of a polarizing series. It's one of those ones that people find to be very dense. So is there, for people who are curious about it, or people maybe even have struggled with it, like, what would you say to them about Book of the New Sun?
So it's one of the most imaginative and creative series that I've ever read.
Yeah.
So you're in for such a treat in that regard. But the thing that I would say is kind of most important, and this is actually advice that I would give to anyone who wants to read anything, is to stop feeling like you have to understand it. So like just give up on feeling like on understanding hard things at this. So like you will not understand Book of the New Sun the first time. It is impossible. And this is what I also have to tell people about reading philosophy. Like, it's hard. It's hard. There's lots of weird stuff going on, right? So give up on totally understanding it the first time, and just know that it's going to be a process. You're probably going to read it again. If you like it enough, you're going to revisit it. Like, that's the stuff that I think is great, and it's like fun. It'll be a process that you will just be a part of for like some huge part of your life. So just get used to it. Just get used to not understanding stuff. Go with the flow. Sometimes you're gonna be like, how did I get from one page to another on Book of the New Sun? Scene to scene, paragraph to paragraph can be jarring sometimes. And yet and yet it's beautiful. It's totally beautiful. There are some people in my Discord doing a read. Some people will form reading groups in my Discord, even if I'm not a part of them. They're reading through Book of the New Sun right now, and they're just like, I don't understand what's happening at all. But I think I like it, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Just keep reading it then.
Yeah, I have found myself attaching almost chapter to chapter to different pieces of the story. Sometimes it's the world building, sometimes it's the moral questions, sometimes it's just the writing. Sometimes I marvel at the way Wolf does things, and then he'll throw a play in there.
He's just a gorgeous writer. He's just a gorgeous writer. There is a scene in either the third or fourth book. Which scenes are in which books kind of blur together for me, where you meet someone who's from another country who like can't. And they basically tell this parable through translation in this very odd way. And there's like all this deep hidden meaning there and stuff. I mean, it's great. It's great. It's like reading like Italo Calvino or something, like this great Italian like literary writer. It's just, I don't know, man, like you just get so much out of it. And there's so much weird and cool and interesting stuff. And it's cool. It's just cool, man. It's just really, really cool. And you should read it.
I think it's literally some of the best world building I've ever read. I just think it's next level. It could end up being like a top 3 series for me, and I'm taking it so slow. I think it took me almost 2 months to read book 2, and I'm so okay with that.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that you advocate for on your channel is not just don't read more, but read better. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that and what's the distinction between those two things.
Yeah. So for some people, there is these things are not intention, right? But the thing that I like to say is that the focus should be on like getting something out of those books, even also if that getting something out of them is like immense pleasure, just because you're reading for fun.
Entertainment.
That's fine. That's fine too. I think sometimes people get the impression that I'm against like reading for fun or reading for pleasure. That's not true at all. But I could see why you would get the impression. But anyway, I think that the important part is to just like focus on the quality of your reading, to actually think about reading as like an art that you are like a practitioner of, and to think about like the technique that goes into writing, also the technique that goes into reading, because you end up just getting more out of your books. You know, for instance, I've never read Robin Hobb, okay, but I get the sense that people really like Robin Hobb. And one of the reasons I get this is that they really like how she treats her characters, right? But you should probably do some thinking about like, what is it to write good characters? Like, what are the techniques that she uses that make her characters so compelling over time? And then as you read, you will start picking these out more and more. Someone referenced Mortimer Adler, who wrote this great book called How to Read a Book. People should read How to Read a Book. They should also read... I'm reading this book by this guy named Robert, I think, Diani, called You Are What You Read, which is a great title. It's a title I wanted to use for stuff for ages. I'm mad.
That's a fantastic title.
I'm furious that this guy published this book last year, because like I may have been writing a book proposal that had that working title, and then I discovered this book and had to Control F some stuff. But that's fine. That's fine. I came up with a better title. But thinking about like what is it to like be like a good reader, right? Like, and there. So for instance, one of the things that I really like in Diani's book is he talks about like, there's what the author shows you, but there's also what the author doesn't show you, and also what the author indicates to you. And he goes through all of these like these different things, right? It's like you get these different ways that the author communicates to you, and he does this by going through poetry of all things. In the first chapter. Derry, I see you're saying Rob is amazing and I should read it. I have Rob on my Kindle, just waiting, right? But one of the pesky things about becoming a father is that these kids demand so much of your time.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Yeah. You apparently have to feed them every day. And so, it just takes time. So my reading is slowed down, but I will read Hobb probably the next 3 years. But I mean, I've got so much stuff on my plate. I mean, it really is, part of it is because so much of my reading is now dictated by the videos that I want to make. So if I want to do these like deep dive videos about someone, I have to read stuff like for a couple of months and space it out actually for some of these. And I need to be working on 3 to 5 of these videos at any one time.
Yeah,
so
it can feel a little bit overwhelming because there's stuff I'd like to reread and maybe do a little bit, more I don't want to use the word analysis, but do more around it, right? China Miéville is one of those people. Like I read all 3 of his Baslag novels, and
he totally deserves it. He totally
it's such an underrated writer, and at least in the discourse in which I'm involved in. His world building is next level. I think he's just special. And you know, I see all these Tolkien videos, which is great. I see a Song of Ice and Fire bit, that's great. But like, where's the Baslag world building videos? Because he does some stuff that is just beyond bizarre, but it's so creative and so beautiful in a grim way, and not even grim, but in a gross way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I was working on this one video, and I think I've scrapped it, which was this comparative thing of some of the works of Orwell with Margaret Atwood's work. Because Atwood has this really great little article where she explains the ending of 1984, because people don't realize that 1984 has a happy ending, which is like a view I've had for a while. And Atwood's like the only one that I've seen. Also, Thomas Pynchon kind of notes this, but like they're like the only 2 people who note this fact. And I was like, wow. And then I started thinking about Atwood, and I'm like, oh, Atwood, like Handmaid's Tale has a happy ending too, but everyone ignores it. I mean, I wanted to just
is one of the most misrepresented things.
Well, yeah. Here's actually why it has a happy ending. Okay. The reason it has a happy ending is because there's an appendix to the book called The Principles of Newspeak. So I assume you've read 1984, right?
I read it actually whenever I was a kid, way back in the day.
Did you read the appendix?
I can't remember. I read it in maybe 7th grade.
So one of the things is that early editions of 1984 in the moment at the very end of 1984. I'm sorry, I'm going to spoil 1984 for you folks, but you've had about 60 years, or no, about 80 years, I think, to read it. So there's that moment where, you know, Winston's like, he loves the party. He's a broken man, right? He's crying at the Chestnut Tree or Hill Cafe, playing chess, and he's crying. He's broken, right? And a lot of the early printings then said the end, right? It's the only Orwell book that gets printed with the end there, right? Modern editions don't often have that, but you can still find it in the digital edition, for instance. And then there's this appendix called The Principles of Newspeak. And a lot of people think that The Principles of Newspeak is just like a world building appendix, right? Let me explain Newspeak, right? It's not written, I mean, it's written by Orwell in the sense that all of the book is written by Orwell.
Right.
It's written from the perspective of a historian who is explaining Newspeak. But there's 2 important things about it. He's writing it in standard English, and he's writing about Oceania as if it no longer exists. So what does that tell you? The party defeats Winston, but the party doesn't win.
Wow. They won the battle, not the war.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And thought, even in English, continues, right? And it's proven by that appendix. And Margaret Atwood does the same thing in The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale, you think about the ending as Offred gets in the van. She's not sure if she's going to prison or being freed. It's an ambiguous ending in that regard, right? And then the next thing is a transcript of an academic conference where people are talking about Gilead, right? And they're talking about it in very academic ways, and they're wondering whether or not they can trust the testimony in the letters that Offred wrote, right, in her journal. But what does that tell you? They all talk about Gilead as if it doesn't exist anymore.
Past tense, yes.
Right? So Gilead, this like horrible, like, also ceases to exist. So we don't know what happened to Offred, right? And that's the thing actually about, like, often, like, with authoritarianism and stuff, many individuals will lose. Like, their individual stories will have sad endings, but the hope is that the greater story has a happy ending, right? So Atwood and Orwell did do this, and I wanted to make a video about this. I am describing because I can never quite get the pitch right? I could never quite find a way to make it into a solid video, but that took me ages.
Hey, I mean, you definitely have, it paid off mentioning it, because Book Songs of the Magic says that a new bit of information about 1984 has blown my mind. I didn't see that, and I've read it 3 times. I
read it in high school, and my teacher told us we didn't have to read the appendix. I get so mad. I get so mad thinking about
it. This is what's wrong with education.
Exactly. This is why you
That's
can't
Alan's thing. I'll let him do it.
You can't teach teachers or trust teachers. Like, but yeah, it took me years. I've read 1984 like 4 times or something, and I only realized that like this last time that I read it.
Man, I think about that all the time, about like the individuals who don't have a happy ending and don't see the other side of like that dark event, whatever it might be. And I don't know why I think about it so much, but I think about it with anything that's happened in the past, whether it be World War II. Like, imagine dying during World War II. You would have been pretty convinced, like right before you went, they said, survey, is the world
Yeah,
going to end in the next 10
yeah, yeah,
years? They would
yeah,
have said,
exactly.
yes,
Yeah,
100%
exactly.
it's going to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And to me, that's just, I don't know. Like, and that's the end of their story, at least in my belief. Like, that's the end, right? And it's just like, wow, that experience, and it's I don't know, it troubles me in
Yeah,
a lot of ways. I was watching a bunch of 9/11 stuff recently, and I had the same exact thoughts about the people who were, tragically, killed that day, and it's just like, wow, I couldn't imagine what they thought was like. Really, for you, the world is ending.
yeah, 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 yeah. I want to clarify one thing in the chat. Someone says I'm from Florida. I am not from Florida. I'm from the great state of Texas, or at least that's where I currently live. That's not where I'm from, but I've lived in Texas for 4 years. So,
Do you like Texas?
I mean, I live in Austin. I love it here in
Oh,
Austin.
fair enough. Yeah, they have good
Yeah,
barbecue, and
yeah, yeah.
I heard there's really good Thai food in Austin. Is this true? Do you eat Thai food?
There is good Thai food in Austin, actually.
Yeah, it's like a random
Now that I
fact.
think, I didn't know, but like I didn't know we were like known about this or something like this. But it's like uh I guess I know like 4 good Thai restaurants in like my general area. So I guess, yeah, we have good Thai food.
Yeah,
Like,
I've heard it's a
yeah,
Thai hotbed, and I that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to go to Austin,
yeah,
actually.
yeah, that's great.
Uh, Nick says, one thing I can give Le Guin credit for is that she said that We is the greatest sci-fi book of all time, 1984, and others totally ripped it off. Westerns get so fixated on 1984. I will say this, even if you don't enjoy Le Guin books, I think Le Guin talking about the genre is very fascinating, and I
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
love
totally.
hearing her take on other people's works.
So we is a good novel. We is a very good novel. It's a very funny novel in that kind of like distinctly Soviet exile kind of way. It's very dark but very funny at the same time. um, um, and Zemiat, I actually have a video in the work about We and Zemiat, and it's just been kind of lingering for a long time. We is great. 1984 borrows heavily from We. I say this, Orwell admits it. He writes in the review that he's going to um, uh, copy it basically for his novel in a way, but I think he does enough interesting things on top of it. I think in some fashion we kind of can view 1984 as less awesome than it is, because it's just like ubiquitous and so widely talked about, but also so widely misunderstood.
Yeah.
But to what you're saying about Le Guin, yeah, I love. I mean, someone said that I might be the biggest Le Guin fan on YouTube. I don't know if that's
You're
true,
the biggest one I know of. You and
but
Gregory Sadler are
but
the
yeah,
two.
but I think we could be like, I think I could be in the top 5, right? Without it
Yeah.
being like, and I recently picked up a copy of the second edition of Language of the Night, which is a collection of Le Guin's essays, and mostly about fiction. Um, Philip Chase will note that there is one important essay there called Elfland and Poughkeepsie. There's also this really great essay called Is Gender Necessary, which was written about the criticism of The Left Hand of Darkness, which actually got a lot of criticism from feminist critics when it was released.
Yes.
And then in the second edition, she didn't want to revise the essay because she didn't believe in revising this stuff, like changing her words after they've been published. So she instead created an annotation called Is Gender Necessary Redux, where she essentially writes margin notes in the essay to say where she got it wrong.
Interesting.
And she goes through and explains how her thinking has changed.
One of the things I
Um,
really admire about her is that she did change the way she thought throughout the years.
She did. She did, absolutely. Le Guin saw herself as a person in progress, right?
Mhm.
And that's really essential, I think, to see. And yeah, yeah, so great. So her nonfiction writing is really really good. Okay, so where to start with Le Guin? That's a really great question. So her best novel, in my opinion, is The Dispossessed. But I don't think for most people that is the place to start, just because it's as sci-fi goes, actually the sci-fi elements are fairly muted. It's mostly a social and political commentary. It's a very important book for me, but I get it. Probably the book you want to read is Left Hand of Darkness. But if you were looking for 2 other options, The Word for World is Forest, which is a kind of breezier read, but it's pretty dark. And then The Lathe of Heaven. Those would be the novels that I would suggest.
I've actually not heard of The Lathe of Heaven, but other people are mentioning here. What's the premise of it?
A man discovers that his dreams can change the nature of reality, and his therapist manipulates him to try to control the world.
Oh my God, I love it. I'm in. Oh my goodness.
Literally, it is a battle between a patient and a therapist.
Nick says The Laugh of Heaven is an homage to PKD, which Le Guin openly admitted it, but it's nowhere near as good in my opinion. Still my favorite Le Guin. Yeah, she was a big fan of PKD, even when it wasn't popular to be a fan of PKD.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest PKD fan, so I would probably quibble about whether or not this is as good or better than PKD. But fair enough.
Yeah, I have found that I love talking about Philip K. Dick's books even more than I like reading. And I like reading them just fine, but I just love conversating about them. The guy was just one of a once in a generation type dude. I mean, he's just so fascinating. Has some of the craziest reasons for writing books, and you want to talk about someone who changed his mind a lot. PKD changed his mind drastically on things throughout the years.
He also lost it a few times.
He was a bit unhinged at times.
Yeah.
I actually have the what is it? The American Library editions of Le Guin's works bound up, and I think I'm going to check out. The Laugh of Heaven is definitely in there, and I might read that this weekend.
Yeah, there's actually a bunch of Library of America volumes for Le Guin. She's one of the most well represented authors. There's her poetry collections. There's Always Coming Home. There are the Hainish Cycle novels, which is a 2-volume set. But yeah, there's tons of good stuff. There's tons of great stuff. She was also one of the few living writers to be memorialized in the Library of America. So she was sort of canonized by LOA before her death.
Interesting.
They should also make a volume of her nonfiction, because, for instance, The Language of the Night has been out of print for a very long time. Yeah.
I know that there's some essays in the version I have, but not many. I would say maybe 4 of them in the second volume of it in the back. And I do know she was on stamps because they were at my post office 3 years ago, which was cool. Matt says conversating is not a real word, but it's fun to be here. Thanks for being here for conversating with Nuts. I appreciate it.
It's a word that Jimmy understood when he said it, and I understood when he said it. So it's a pretty good argument for it being a real word.
I believe that's called communication, my friend.
Yeah. So, which in conversating is a subspecies of communicating. So
we made it. We did it. Yeah. Key wants to know: does Jared like the Earthsea stories?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I like the Earthsea stories. I think that's one of the more interesting series to think about, because it's unified, unlike the Hainish Cycle. The Hainish Cycle is not a unified story. In fact, it's actually probably not internally consistent, but that wasn't really what Le Guin was going for. But with Earthsea, it's very clearly a full story, even though we change characters and stuff. I mean, and it's probably the best representation in a single series of how Le Guin changed her thinking, right? Yes. It took Le Guin forever to write a female protagonist. She couldn't do it,
and when she did, it was excellent.
And then she writes Tehanu, and you're like, dang. Tehanu is where you really actually get a female protagonist, right? Where the first one actually was Tombs of Atuin, right, is good, but she's not as fleshed out. Tehanu's not as fleshed out. It just took her time. In one famous interview, Le Guin said, "I am a man." And then when asked to explain that, she's like, well, because when I was being educated, there was no other option. It was all assumed, men were assumed to be the default, right? And she was really wrestling with that being her default for a long time. And most of her best novels have male protagonists, and it took her a long time to get there, but she did. Yeah.
Watching her evolve through Earthsea, the last one I've read so far has been Tehanu, and it's just radically different and in all the right ways for me. People talk about some series that grow up with the author, and with her taking such a large break in the Earthsea series and returning to it, it was fascinating to get back in that world and still feel like that world, but with a much different vibe to it, and angry, very, very angry. Yeah, at least that's how I felt from it.
I do think she gets angrier as she writes, as she develops as a writer. I think she gets angrier.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
Maybe that comes with confidence.
Yeah, I think so. And I also think one of the things that happens is that a lot of Le Guin's earlier works is each of the books will have someone else's idea at the center. So the Dispossessed is really like Peter Kropotkin, like anarchism, right? And it's like, what would it be like? And she said, she's like, what would it be like to write an anarchist utopia? And then, of course, because she's like Lynn, she has to make it into a um, ambiguous utopia, right? And she has to actually show the tensions and the complications. And the first Earthsea book, there's a really good argument to be made that it's basically just like it's like Jungian psychology put into a wizard school. By the way, she was writing wizard schools before anyone else was writing wizard schools. Like, it was not a thing at the time to write common wizard school stories. And it looks like she just did a lot of this stuff, like took ideas that were and then I think she became more comfortable with like her own voice and her own ideas.
Yeah.
Over time, where she didn't have, yeah.
I think that happens whenever you do anything. I know that I feel way more confident saying things that I wouldn't have felt confident saying on this show 3 years ago, because I think I've learned how to state them better. And I feel a little bit more concrete in the way I feel about, maybe not concrete's the word, but, you know, sturdy in the way I feel. So yeah, I think those things do go kind of hand in hand. I love the way she messes with darkness / shadow, which I do know is not her original idea, but it echoes throughout Wizard of Earthsea, especially in the first book. And you said something very, very excellent in your video where you said where Ged acts almost as the antagonist and the protagonist. And
yeah, he's the hero and the villain.
It's
right? Like,
that's such a beautiful way of putting it, and what makes that story awesome to me.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we don't have to go into that's a story I won't spoil, but basically it ends up being that to win the big fantasy battle that every good fantasy novel has, Ged has to recognize the evil in himself. That's basically the sort of the emotional takeaway,
which I think is relatable.
Yeah.
I mean, I am constantly, I think, playing games with myself to not see the greatest faults, and then
yeah.
Some of the most profound moments you'll have in life is whenever you actually do face them down and accept them.
And I would also say that this has really strong harmony with the ending of the Wheel of Time. So the greatest fantasy series of all time. So
we almost made it all the way through. All right. I'll say something nice about the Wheel of Time, but then you have to say something nice about the Name of the Wind.
Okay. Yeah,
all right. Yeah. Robert Jordan was excellent when it came to setting up his world and the environments in which the people were being placed in, and making the cultures very distinct feeling, not just with the way that they talk or anything, but also with the clothes and the way that they handle themselves in between, the different cultures coming together, which actually is something Le Guin does very well also in Left Hand of Darkness. Very much enjoy Robert Jordan's scene setting. Like Camelin lives rent free in my brain still to this day, even though I don't love the series.
Yeah. So I'd say something nice about Name of the Wind now.
Something real nice about Name of the Wind. Yeah.
This isn't good audio.
This is beautiful.
I actually can't think of a single thing I like. I'm so sorry. I feel like I feel like people are gonna think I'm putting on airs here. I cannot think of a single thing I enjoy about that book.
My first comment ever left on your channel, you're like, "What are you guys reading this weekend?" And I was like, "I'm reading Wise Man's Fear, your from your favorite author."
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I can't think of a single thing I like about that book. There's this one sentence in that book that's like the room was filled with like the faint scent of oak or cedar or something like this, and I remember thinking, the room is filled with a faint scent. It just doesn't make it. And this is early in the book, and I'm like, it filled the room. It was faint, and you could notice it everywhere. And I was like, I wasn't on board after that sentence. And because I think people had told me like, he's like the most beautiful prose stylist writing today. And I read it, thought, no, he wasn't.
Well, it made you think.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think are there 3 scenes where someone gets hit in the head, blacks out, and then wakes up a little bit later. I think there's 3 scenes in that book that happen. The world of The Name of the Wind is just like made up of people with concussions.
I actually didn't notice it, which is one of my pet peeves in fiction. As someone who's
No.
suffered many head traumas, that you know, and I just woke up and then went on my day, and I didn't notice it.
Okay. Here's the thing I can say: the time in the frame story, right? In the frame story, not the story that he's telling, but like the is more pleasant, I think.
Okay.
Right. With like, is it Bast? Is that the other guy who's like there with him and stuff? Like their interactions are slightly better, in part because like Bast is like kind of calling him on his BS. It's something like that. Yeah, that's basically where I am. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I liked about it is I really like the undercurrent of economic struggle that Quoth goes through. I actually find that, because even in the more relaxing scenes, you're thinking, well, how is he going to afford this? How is he going to do this? And maybe that's too real for me, because I mean, I've spent most of my life.
Do you like the scene where he gets awarded a scholarship because they put like negative in front of the number and he doesn't realize what the negative means for like 3 pages? And it's emotional tension apparently about not understanding what a negative is. Like, this is,
I thought it's been Jared.
Yeah, it's been years since I read this book, and it's so much of it has lingered, much like the faint smell of that cedar. It's just in my mind. Yeah.
Do you think that you'll reread them?
No.
I've heard that you should read a book 3 times.
Well, that's pleasant advice. You know. Yeah.
Well, I definitely appreciate the fact that you gave it the good old college try.
Thank you.
This one might be a little bit easier for you to praise, and it's The Player of Games.
Oh yeah.
Culture series. I saw that you like that book, and that's the one I started Culture with, and it's actually the only Culture book I've read so far. But my goodness, what a book!
Yes, that is a great book. That is an excellent book. We can finally talk about good stuff, and I can say so. I like Banks a good deal. I'm reading Use of Weapons kind of slowly, because I'm reading like 7 books simultaneously or something right now, so I read a few pages every once in a while. And one thing you have to give Banks a lot of credit for is that basically every novel he tries something new as well, even though it's all set in the culture. Like, Consider Phlebas is the first one, and I didn't really like Consider Phlebas, but The Player of Games is great. I thought that I was so afraid when I was reading that novel that we were going to have to get caught up in really tedious descriptions of the game itself.
Yeah.
And I was like, and that's going to be awful. That's going to be terrible to read. And then I thought, and if he doesn't explain it, then it would be awful too, right? Because I wouldn't feel any tension. But actually, he is able to somehow never fully explain the game, and you feel incredibly engaged in like every move in a really great way.
It's also very funny. He does that AI kind of robot humor thing so well, I thought.
He keeps that up in he keeps that up in Use of Weapons pretty well. The minds are in general very funny. Nice. And they're also horrifying if you think about the culture as like a society. It's not everyone it's supposed to be this like kind of anarchist like place where you can like everyone gets to live like a king, etc. There are no real laws and stuff like this, except like also it's like an imperialist nightmare that wants to keep conquering other planets. And also you only get to really have a good time as long as like the minds don't decide that you're fine and you can kind of fly under their radar, because if they decide that you're going to do something, they'll just like manipulate the world sufficiently until you have to obey them. But they'll never like order you, because no one gets to order you in the culture, but they'll so
is it really a utopia?
yeah, right. It's like, so so I wouldn't actually want to like live in the culture, but yeah, Player of Games rules. Player of Games, so good. It's also just this great example of like the scene where the main character, and I'm terrible with names. I can't
remember the main character's name either.
But where he's watching the secret broadcast, which are like full of torture scenes and stuff, because the high-ranking officials just watch those for entertainment. and he's watching them, right? And it's such a good scene, even though it sounds so awful, because it's like him descending, right? It's like him becoming them to try to understand them and defeat them at their own game. But then, of course, the climax is he has to play like the culture, and they have to play like the Empire.
Yeah.
What the hell is?
Oh, that is a new Mac OS thing. If you do a thumbs up, it'll do a emoji bubble.
My goodness.
Yeah, you can turn it off. It happened to me when we were doing our Song of Ice and Fire podcast, and my co-host Matt was like, "What is happening?"
Yeah. Okay.
Bart's Book Space has a question. He says, "I know Jared loves Solaris by Lem. I just read Lem's Invincible, and it's great. I wonder what other Lem novels, if any, Jared likes."
I haven't read any other Lem novels. Sorry. Yeah, I've only read Solaris. Yeah, it's one of those, the problem with liking too many things, right? So you can't read all the science fiction you want to read. Can't read all the fantasy you want to read. You can't read all the philosophy you want to read. Lem's one of those.
Yeah, I have not read Lem. I don't know who Lem is. I'll be dead honest.
Stanislaus Lem. You should read Solaris. It's a really short book. It's a really short. You could read it. Well, I don't know exactly your pace, but you'd read it in less than a week, certainly. It's good though. It's quite good. I put it in one of my list of like philosophical science fiction books.
Nice. Having it be short is already a good selling point for me at the current moment. You're all tripping says, "What are the most disturbing books you've ever read?" For me, The Second Apocalypse by R. Scott Baker probably takes the cake.
Hyperion by Dan Simmons. But mostly the story of the priest, right? The cruciform story. There,
very
troubling. But I don't read a ton of horror, because I am a wimp. That's the answer. I don't read horror because I get scared too easily. So
I was actually going to ask you about that because I don't feel like I've heard you talk about horror a lot.
Yeah. I guess, I've read Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion, and there are some horror elements to it, but I would like almost never read like a straightforward horror book. I kind of want to read some like Junji Ito like manga. For some reason that feels less scary. But as a kid, I was pretty young. I was reading a lot of manga as a kid, and I got a copy of the first volume of Battle Royale without understanding what I was about to experience. And it's still like burned into my head. And oh man, it like makes me feel ill. Yeah. I don't handle horror very well.
Yeah, Uzumaki's pretty disturbing. I'll be honest. I actually didn't really enjoy his stuff, and that is like my hottest manga take because I know it's beloved, but I just couldn't get into it. I also tried a manga called PTSD Radio, which is supposed to be very disturbing, and I also didn't very much care for it. So,
okay, yeah,
I think horror manga is. I like horror books. I love horror movies, but
yeah, this is one of the reasons why I said like I don't read King. It's actually not because I have like strong opinions about whether or not King would be good or not. Like I'm willing to believe mostly that people who like it or something like this know like that they like horror, books and stuff like that. I just have no interest in being scared as like as a on a regular basis. And horror films destroy me. They like, I mean, like I'll be in tears watching horror films.
Well, good thing I cut the jump scares from the stream that I was going to do for Halloween.
I remember the last horror film I think I saw in theaters was probably The Strangers. This would have been years ago. This was
wow, I love that movie actually.
And there's like it takes like 30 minutes for any violence to happen, right? But it's going to get horrible. And there's just this scene where they're like filling up their car at a gas station and they're like mad at each other, but they're going to go to this house. And the whole time they're like, she's filling up the car at the gas, like they're filling it up, and I'm like, like waiting for something, and I just can't handle it. I just can't handle it.
I gotta rewatch The Strangers. I love that movie,
but like I like The Shining as like a film, but that doesn't feel like a real horror film in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely psychological. In many ways, for sure. I really like this question from Derry. She said, "I'd like to know if Jared has a book that he loves, but also knows is objectively bad."
Yeah, that's a good question. Give me 1 second while we talk about this. I'll come back to this. I'm gonna like look through my Kindle library really fast to see what I've like looked at lately, because that'll be like my most recent.
And also, Kev has a good point.
Yeah.
He just says King has plenty of non-horror you should also check out. Like I think 11/22/63 would be a great way for you to experience King.
Okay, this is actually why I read The Dark Tower. I should note. Like I read that because I wanted to read. So I read all of The Dark Tower, and I thought there were good parts. I think that there are 3 really good books in The Dark Tower, and I don't say that as like and 4 of them are terrible. That's not what I mean. I just think there are like 3 really good ones. So
I think that's a totally fair assessment. Yeah.
I know someone said all of Wheel of Time for the bad books that I love. No.
We are Wheel of Time haters here at the network, but we welcome you with open arms.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I will be starting a new competitor channel, the Fantasy Networks, maybe with a Z if it gets a little too confusing, where we only talk about Wheel of Time.
To be honest, Daniel Green told you to say this.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. he's almost certainly a bigger Wheel of Time fan than I am, just because he's read it so many fancy editions. Yeah. But I love the Wheel of Time so much, man. Ooh, yeah. It's great. I almost cried at the ending of Wheel of Time, and I remember
only almost.
Well, I don't cry at books very often, but I remember like reading it and being like. And Jordan wrote that the ending, from what I know, is like Jordan wrote the ending, or at least he had planned it out really, really heavily, right? Like the very end. I remember just being like, you did it, man. You did it. I was just like so proud.
I mean, there's something absolutely captivating as someone who enjoys the series and getting through that many books. And then like, obviously the emotional weight of knowing that the original author is passed. I mean, there's probably nothing really else like it. And yeah, there are definitely people who love Wheel of Time in my chat. I'm just being stupid. Kev says his bad book is Twilight. He says it slaps.
Oh yeah, okay, I see. Yeah, I mean, maybe like I have incredibly fond memories of like Harry Potter, for instance, because of like growing up at the right time. But I think when you go back and reread it, it's like the prose is like really wooden, and like the dialogue is really strangely written in a lot of ways, and you kind of look at that. But I don't even know if I would count that as like a book I like actively still love. I just have like a lot of like nostalgia for it because of the right time in my life.
Yeah,
I actually counts. I feel like this one might be slightly a bit of a hot take, but I don't. Oh, okay. I actually think that you can make the case that it goes like this for some Brandon Sanderson stuff. That Brandon Sanderson, not all of his stuff, but that some of the books are objectively have like serious problems with them, but that they end up just being really damn fun. Like they're really fun. They're really fun to read.
I always enjoy the fact that when I read Sanderson, I'm gonna most likely love the plot and any twist that he ends up doing, because I think he's exceptional at those things.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed Yumi, his Secret Project number 3, and then I'm gonna try to read his 4th one, but I'm really just waiting on that 5th Stormlight book, man. I've
heard Yumi and the Sunlit Men are good. I read Tress when it came out. I didn't read Wizard's Frugal Guide or whatever. I just like wasn't interested in it at the time. But I certainly want to read Yumi and the Sunlight Man. And actually, the Secret Projects kind of encapsulate what I think is wrong with Brandon Sanderson here, and why I think some of his work ends up being kind of objectively bad, even though it can be very fun, which is that he just pumps them out so fast. And I think he's even said this in interviews where he knows he would write better books if he slowed down. But he just like wants to feed, like he's just got like so many series going on, and he's got so much stuff he wants to write, and he really is conscious, like he talks about this, he wants to write it all before he dies.
Yeah.
So he just wants to get it out, right? And so I just don't, and so that's basically why I say that some of it's bad, even though it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is notable and it can be considered whenever we're talking about like the output is just his ambition to do this Cosmere thing and to have these narratives within narratives and connecting it all together. I mean, I gotta say, I kind of love that. Even if I don't love all of the Cosmere, I just love the idea of someone going for it and having a vision and embracing it and being like, I may not do this thing great, and I can admit that, but what I am going to do is find a group of people who love what I am doing and focusing on, and I'm going to deliver for them year after year, month after month. And I think that is honestly something that should be applauded in a lot of ways, because there's plenty of my favorite authors that I wish wrote as much as even if it even if it wasn't as like, I would just love to get, the Winds of Winter. So I I can see the criticisms, and I certainly don't love every Sanderson book I read, but I have had some of his that I think are I really love the Stormlight Archive. I think it's
Yeah.
really
Except I
nice.
think I think for instance, um, the fourth Stormlight book is the weakest in my opinion. People like it the most because you end up learning more about the world and that parts of it are really cool. But the pacing of that book is really bad in my opinion. It's a bloated book, and he can get away with it because his editors, he's so famous that at this point no one's going to tell him he has to cut 50,000 words. But I found it really bloated. I actually don't like his representation of mental health, like Kaladin's depression and stuff. I don't think it's as well done as people say it is. Um, and so then all of the Kaladin scenes I felt like ended up being pretty repetitive, and didn't really work for me. Um, Even though I really want Stormlight 5 because I'm very deeply invested in the overall story. I just think that there's a lot of craft I think missing there that actually has gotten worse at a little bit of his writing, right? Like Words of Radiance is good. Is it no, Way of Kings is the first
Way
is
of
his first
Kings,
book.
Words of Radiance. Both
Way of
good.
Kings is good. Words of Radiance is very good.
I
Words
love
of Radiance is great in a lot of ways. Oathbringer, solid, right? And yeah, so I just think I just think that there are just like technical issues basically basically coming out of it later on in his books.
Yeah, I thought Oathbringer was interesting just because he kind of took a gamble with like the climax and how he structured it. And for
Mhm.
that, I was like, hey, something different. Because a lot of times people will accuse him of being formulaic. And
Mhm.
to see him kind of break away from that, I was like, okay, like this is, and that's one thing about Stormlight that I find interesting is that it feels like that's Sanderson's pride and joy in a lot of ways, and where you
Yeah.
see him do things that are different from his other books. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I like it so much. And I'm with you. I was mixed. I was positive, but I didn't like book 4 as much as the other ones. But I would be a liar to say that if book 5 of Stormlight isn't one of the most anticipated things I can think of for books for me, man. Like am just I can't wait for that day when it comes out. It's going to be so fun.
Yeah. I think that's, and I see other people, for instance, are saying that they really like um Kaladin's like being depressed in there.
Mhm.
I do think that, for instance, Sanderson's doing one thing really well, which is having clearly depressed characters, right?
Yeah,
Like in a way that actually a lot of writers don't make it as possible. Derry, you're mentioning Hobb does mental health very well. I've heard that, right? I've heard that she does it very well, and so I'd like to kind of compare the two. What I just found was that with Kaladin, what happened was instead of feeling like it was like progress, setback, progress, what it felt was like Kaladin's depressed, so no progress forever, and then sudden progress, like immediate progress, right? Like you get this like sudden realization, which has to happen in that big climactic moment. It builds it up and stuff. It just didn't. I just did not feel good, good for me as I was like sort of really, yeah.
yeah. I think I think there's parts of it that I really enjoy from the depression. I mean, I suffer from it, so like I totally when I see that and my gut reaction is awesome, right? But there were moments in his arc wherever I felt like it didn't relate to, and depression is different for everybody. Like that, there are certain things that are similar, but everyone has their own way of going about it and handling it or not handling it or whatever. And then some of those didn't ring true for me.
Mhm.
But that I don't want to discount it and say that it wasn't true for anybody, right? But
Yeah. I mean, with a lot of this stuff, I think one of the reasons that people really get a little defensive. I'm not saying anyone here was defensive, but when I've made the point before, people get a little defensive about the brand standard mental health thing, is that for you at the right time, if you are struggling with that stuff, reading it like that could be really useful, right?
yeah,
It could mean a lot to you. And so you never like want to take that away from them being like, did you know actually that this thing that was like foundational for you like getting over your depression kind of sucks? Like, like that's not
yeah, that's not
like you never
not what we're wanting to do, right?
you don't yeah, that's not what we're here about at Chat with Nuts, so I'm speaking as if I own the show now, this is my
We are looking for stakeholders, so if you would like to
okay.
pitch,
It's yeah,
we
angel
can push your
investors into
Substack,
Chatting with
bro.
Nuts. Yeah. Good to know. Good to know.
Oh man. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your Friday night, and I appreciate all the time you've given me. But the one thing I wanted to kind of close on is that you yourself write a lot, and you have a project you're working on. And I don't know how much of that you would want to reveal, but could you talk about it a little bit?
Yeah. So I'm working on a nonfiction book, and I don't want to talk about too many of the details about it, but I would say this, like if you watch, say, like my books about my like old video of mine called How to Read Better, another video about don't worry about reading more books, focusing on reading better, these sorts of things, like this general theme about reading better, about the value of reading, what reading actually does for you, um as a as a person, right? That kind of stuff, and with lots of examples from across the gamut of science fiction and fantasy and philosophy and history and a bunch of stuff here, drawing heavily from like books of the Western canon, but also drawing heavily from books around the world. The kind of stuff that I try to do everywhere. That's basically what the book is about. I kind of like this will not be the title whenever it's published, and who knows, the publishing scene is so weird, and I have to like find an agent still and stuff like this. But the working title in my head is called "Reading a Manifesto." so,
I like it.
Yeah. That's that's basically um that's basically the project. It's basically to just take this like this passion about reading and this like love of it, and to say, in a world where you could do so much other stuff, why would you bother to read? I was in a chat with Joanna a while ago
Yeah.
called on this why read series, and it's such a great foundational question, right? And it's not just why reading here, but like also breaking down this barriers, like why do you feel like you can't read Plato, right? If you're, my general view is that if you've made it through high school, you can probably read most works of philosophy or literature if you're willing to kind of put in some elbow grease, but you need maybe a little bit of a guide or something like that, right? And that's the kind of thing that I want to um that's the kind of thing I'm trying to trying to work out here.
I think opening up those doors, kind of calling back to the Le Guin thing about opening up doors, right,
Yeah.
is very important. And I think making reading more approachable in any fashion, whatever it might be, is really important. So I'm pumped that you're working on that, man. I know that you've been working hard on it, and you got some good people helping you out. And I think,
Yeah. I've got good people sort of like reviewing my proposal and stuff. With nonfiction, I don't know if you know the difference between doing nonfiction and fiction. Yeah, Street Medic, Harold Bloom. I mean, yeah, imagine I'm trying to. No, I'm not drinking a beer either. I'm drinking a lime seltzer from HEB, the greatest Texas coffee or grocery store. But anyway, imagine Harold Bloom's book on the Western canon or something like this without being as exclusive
hi,
as
Jared.
Harold Bloom's book. Because I have like a section on classics, but like I'm talking about like Khalil Gibran or something like this. Gibran, is it? But also Dickinson, but then a section on science fiction where I talk about Le Guin and things like that. And yeah, but with writing a nonfiction book, well, if you're writing a fiction book, this is the easy. It goes like you would expect. You write the book, then you go find an agent. You send them the book and say, "Do you like this enough?" And then they help you fix it up, and then you find a an editor and a publisher and all of this stuff. Nonfiction doesn't work that way. Um, Nonfiction, you mostly write some of the book, and you write a really thorough outline and proposal, and explain like why you're the person to write it, right?
Hmm.
And that's the kind of thing I'm working on right now. And then you send it to agents to then try to get it. You get the deal, and then they work with you to finish the book.
Hmm.
It's
That is
it's
much
it's a
different.
yeah, it's a very different world. So I don't have to have the whole book written before I can hopefully get an agent and stuff. But I have to have enough of it written that I know what I want to say in the other chapters, and I have to have an outline to show people that I have like a plan.
This might not be even a fair question to ask, but do you think it's easier to be published in nonfiction or fiction?
Um, well, it's a little different, right? So
Yeah.
here's why. Fiction is probably the most egalitarian, and by this I mean, or maybe meritocratic in the sense like if you're good enough, you'll get published,
Mhm.
or you can work really hard and you've got some chance of success, right? With nonfiction, unfortunately, a lot of the way that it works in your proposal is you explaining why you're the person to write the book, right? It's a lot about platform and who you are. And I have some things going for me, basically, that make me it a little bit easier, right? I have a PhD, and that like agents look at that and say, "Oh, there's like interesting academic credentials." I have by the time I send out the proposal, I think I'll have 200,000 YouTube subscribe. You have like
Yeah,
these
it's big.
things. Um and so you just mentioned those things, and um that helps me make the case basically. right?
Yeah.
In a way that it's not as if it's impossible to get published for nonfiction stuff there, but you'd have to do a lot more convincing if you didn't already have the kind of, couldn't tell a story about why you're the person to write it,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And certainly the YouTube audience helps tremendously because, you know, you can expect some sort of units to be moved from having built-in base, and it's very related to the content you're making. It's not like you're a cooker, you know, you're not in there like whipping up food and then being like, by the way.
Yeah, so if I wrote like a nonfiction book that was like about the wonders of the universe, right, and there was like galaxies and stuff, like it wouldn't make any sense, right? But like people who watch me want to hear about reading and hear about philosophy and like these sorts of things, and so that's the it kind of fits fits in well with the kind of stuff that I'm trying to do anyways.
Yeah.
So.
It's kind of cool to see that it's all in this sphere of what you're doing and what you're trying to piece together.
Yeah, you know, I didn't intentionally. Well, you know, when I started actually the channel, I did have an intentional thing here, which was only going to talk about classic books. It was only going to be like the great books of the Western canon. I don't think those are the only books worth reading, but I thought like that was like a niche I could carve out for myself. I then found I just kind of naturally explored more, but I found that there isn't maybe a topical theme that has united all of my videos, but there is kind of a kind of narrative thrust to it all, where I'm trying to do like one thing really with all of my videos, and the book would sort of be the sort of statement of all that stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you're heading in the right direction. It sounds like you absolutely have the credentials to do it, but also the drive and the determination. So
I hope
I'm
so.
wishing you the best, man.
I have a full version of the proposal, and I have a couple of draft chapters, and it's just figuring out which parts look the best, you know?
Yeah. This is interesting. Nick says, by the way, Mieville is a very good nonfiction writer. I don't like his fiction, but his books on the Russian Revolution and on the Communist Manifesto are great. And I was going to ask you, I know you're writing nonfiction, but have you tinkered in writing fiction?
Oh yeah, I've tinkered in writing fiction. In fact, I was working on a science fiction novel for a while, but when I really decided to really decided to focus on the nonfiction, I had to set it all aside.
Yeah.
But like I've done NaNoWriMo a few times and stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, which is a great way to just kind of get in the habit of writing a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something, if you can do it often, I think you see big jumps. And I will pretend like I'm going to do NaNoWriMo and then not do it like I do every year. And I look forward to that.
I mean, I should say, like, I think I have one major skill as a writer, which is that I'm able to produce a lot of words fairly quickly, which is like the first step to getting, they're not good, right? But like a lot of people just struggle to like get that right. That's why they find NaNoWriMo hard. I typically, when I do NaNoWriMo, win NaNoWriMo by getting to 50,000 words halfway through the month. It doesn't mean the book's good, right? It doesn't mean the book's good, but I am capable of just like getting a lot of words onto the page in a way that gives me a lot of raw material to kind of work with, right? So, you know, nonfiction books these days are really short, like the ones that really do well, really short. I'm talking 40,000 words sometimes, 60,000 kind of normal, 75,000 words pushing it. And so you need to like, but for me, I'll probably write 150,000 words total before I whittle it down, right?
I wish somebody would tell Robert Sapolsky to write shorter books, because I always want to read his books, and then they're 900 pages, and I'm like, when does this fit in?
It's like that. Do you remember the Piketty book, The Capital in the 21st Century, that came out years ago? It was like this huge bestseller about economics and stuff.
Yeah,
it's like 600 pages, super thick. If you look at the Kindle data, so Amazon can tell if you don't read your Kindle books, right? It's like the most not read book that's been purchased.
I would have put it on like War and Peace or the Brothers Karamazov. Those are the ones I would have bet on.
It was just like shocking numbers of people read it, started reading it, and got to like page 10 and thought, yeah, I don't want to.
Amazon's ratting on people. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to seeing what you do with it, and it'll probably be one of the nonfiction books that I end up fitting into my schedule whenever I see it published. And I see it out in Barnes and Noble.
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, my market, part of the way is like when you talk about platforms, you have to tell a publisher how would you want to market it, right? And part of my marketing strategy is like I've got like 1,000 booktube friends. And it's not that or like pick 100 of them, right, and just send it out and tell them to talk about it, something like that. So I don't know, maybe you'll get a book from me one day.
I would love it. I would need, whenever you're doing your book tour, you got to come back on though. That's the
Okay.
only. That's the deal.
Yeah, sounds good. I assumed I was going to be a regular from now on.
I
thought it
mean,
was
I would be
Jimmy,
more than happy.
Jared, and a third guest. But
Listen, I would be more than happy to have you back
yeah,
on.
yeah.
I am so humbled that you have time for me having
Oh no, this was a blast. This was a
newborn.
blast. This was so fun. Yeah,
I'm super.
he's
glad we
thankfully
could put
asleep,
that
so that
in.
helps. But yeah,
Yeah, and that is very lucky because
Yeah.
some kids don't sleep. So
we had to actually like hire a specialist to help us train him to sleep. You have to teach
Really?
kids to sleep, basically. Yeah, it was pretty bad for a little while, but it was good. Yeah, I think Jimmy and I are going to go on the road. I think that's right, Yorkshire. I think I'm gonna have to lean into being the heel, I guess, because he seems to be the baby face here.
yeah, I'll be
so-
the everyday man. Like you'll use those words that you use, and then I will break it down.
Like kind of like the Miz or something, right? Like everyone wants to hate him, right? Because he's just so you
Hateable.
just you lean into that, right? So.
I want to talk about a guy who's had success leaning into it. I mean, that guy has been around for 20 years now.
Yeah.
And no one would have thought that 20 years ago.
And but he's great. Watching the Miz wrestle is always fun. So you love to hate him, right? So
he's also extremely nice guy. I one of the times where I did WWE TV like prior, it was in Cleveland, which was his hometown. And
cool,
he was just available to like everybody, and some of those guys don't talk to you when you go up there, but he was very friendly and also a large human being, by the way.
He's huge.
Like
he's
shockingly big.
Yeah, he's huge. You meet some of these guys. I feel like this is one of these things that we didn't talk about at all, is that I don't watch it nearly as often as I did, but at one point I was like super into wrestling, like in grad school.
Really?
Like, I was like, yeah. And when I was in New England, I would go see like local New England like wrestling like leagues.
Do you know a guy named Brutal Bob?
I don't know Brutal Bob. No.
Okay. He was Northeaster.
Yeah. But I usually would have to drive back to Boston. I lived in Boston before when I was in Connecticut. I'd have to drive back to see stuff, so I didn't get to go as often. But so like I find wrestling, I love professional wrestling. Like I think it's like amazing, and so I love the storytelling. I love the drama of it, and I'm just like super into the weird combination of athleticism and storytelling that they do. It rules.
It's definitely bizarre. It is the most bizarre thing. Being away from him for so long, I mean, I literally, it was my life, but I watch it now and it's not as familiar as it once was. Like I feel weird watching it, actually.
I do have to go soon, and I think other people are like, why are they still talking about stuff? But I am curious how you feel when you see those guys do. There's like a few moves, right, that are genuinely dangerous. There's a lot of work done in professional wrestling to like not kill yourself.
Yes,
but someone does a suicide dive or something like this, and you're like, there's no way to actually make that. like there is a risk that this is like the last one you do every time you do it. And you see some guys who are just into it, like they're known for just being willing to do it. I'm just curious how you feel about that when you see them.
Oh, I've always admired people that are able to throw out everything they're in their mind and just be in that moment. I had that for a while, but then whenever reality hits you and it goes wrong once, you're like, ooh, boy, I'm human and this is real, and I have to live with this on the car ride home. I will tell you this. I would rather do a tope or a suicide dive or a full flip to the outside than I would ever take a back body drop ever again.
Oh, okay.
The old school, like Ric Flair back body drop, and he goes up.
Yeah.
Most dangerous move other than the Alabama Slam that Bob Holly used to do. That move is also extremely dangerous. And fun fact, the DDT. The DDT is extraordinarily dangerous.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. See, that's the weird thing about the audience, right? You don't always know what's actually dangerous.
Yes.
And like the commentators are often misleading you about the stuff, right?
Oh, yeah. And things that
it's part of the show, right?
Yeah, set up or the beginning of a match, like a hip toss. Bro, I've had so many people like didn't let me do my own thing because it's very much like a you're flipping yourself type deal, and then someone actually over rotates you, hit your tailbone, and you're like, it's the worst, absolute worst.
Anyway, wrestling's great, books are good, read them, and
and subscribe to Jared's channel if you haven't already. I have a feeling that you probably are. So, Jared, thanks for coming on, man, and thanks for giving me some of your time.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy.
Yeah, absolutely. Chat, thank you for being here. You guys are always a pleasure. I'm so glad that I have such a supportive community and people who want to show up and add to the conversation and just be here. So thanks for being present. You can find Jared's stuff down below, and there is a Patreon in the description. It's optional, but always appreciated. And until we see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page.